Thank you very much for joining us today on the second ever meeting of the Whole and East Yorkshire Combined Authority Scrutiny Committee. We have the usual suspects in from the last meeting, along with a couple of others, so I'll just quickly begin with introductions. We do have a new member of the committee with us today in the form of Councillor Collinson, so I'd like to welcome you to our family here, to the group. I'm absolutely no doubt that you've watched the previous meeting. It only took 3 hours, so very, very detailed scrutiny, and looking forward to all your contributions along with the rest of the members here. We also have Poppy standing in for Louise from a Democratic Services perspective, and our monitoring officer is Tony Maione, who is in for Jane excuse me, my Dutch isn't as good as it should be, apparently. So with that in mind, as I say, we have all the members of the committee who all introduced themselves ahead of the last meeting. We have the chief executive in the form of Alan over there, and Miriam as well. So thank you both for joining us too. We have Mayor Campbell and Steve Skelton presenting the first agenda item proper to us. However, there is the usual bits to sort before we start. So if I may, Kumar, please, are there any apologies?
Not that I'm aware of. Poppy?
No apologies, that's it.
No apologies, Steve. Thank you very much. Agenda item 1 down. Agenda item 2 then would be declarations of interest. Are there any declarations for any members around the table?
No, it's not, but we'll identify.
Thank you very much, Councillor Randall. On that note, actually, the microphone is in the middle of the room. We were all picked up relatively well in our last meeting. However, Councillor Jeffries is much more quietly spoken than myself. And so there is a microphone there. If anybody is struggling to hear, we can pass it round. But as I say, I think the only person the microphone had trouble picking up at the last meeting was Councillor Jeffries. So we should be okay to make sure that we're all on YouTube and able to be enjoyed by our legions of adoring fans forevermore. So thank you. Now, agenda item 3 is minutes of the last meeting. Just to start from my point of view, there was a couple of typos in there. We went through this at the pre-meeting. I have spoken with Democratic Services officers, so all the typos have been noted, noticed and corrected. So that should be okay there. There was one other element, and that was the recommendations for the agenda item relating to the community fund. Specifically, there was a slight omission, shall we say. I didn't feel that it properly captured the depth of the debate we undertook. And that is the second recommendation made by the committee, that there were concerns about the eligibility criteria not having been published, and it was suggested that a grant tiering system and a maximum grant amount were required. And I suggest that as a committee we agree to add the phrasing with proportional and appropriate requirements, just to ensure that everything that we discussed is properly encapsulated and therefore able to advise the board in their decision making. Are there any objections to that? Fantastic. Thank you very much, members. And then the second element here was that one of the discussions we had was about the community fund specifically being targeted at areas of deprivation. And Mayor Campbell went into some detail about why that reasoning had been put forward and prioritised. One of the recommendations from this committee was that isolation be considered with parity to deprivation. And that was something that we did all agree to in the meeting. And so I would suggest the phrasing isolation needs to be included as a measure alongside deprivation when determining both eligibility and priority. And again, members, if we're all happy for that to be included as a recommendation 6. Fantastic, thank you very much. Now, Councillor Glance, I believe there was something you wanted to bring from the minutes also.
Just one minor, well, it's a change rather than a correction to the minutes. We all nominated our substitutes, and my substitute is in the minutes as Councillor Nolan, but it's now going to be Councillor Cantrell. But that can just be noted in future reference.
Thank you very much. Councillor Collinson, please.
Yeah, in the minutes as Councillor Collinson declaring an interest as being related to the mayor, and Councillor Collinson also, but a different one. So I wonder if Councillor Collinson will be recorded as Councillor A. Collinson, or myself as Councillor M. Collinson, in order to differentiate, because it's potential cause for confusion. I don't intend to be declaring interest, because as far as I know, the mayor and I are not related.
We will wait for the return of the blood samples from the lab, but until that point, I'll just say thank you very much, Councillor Collinson. And if that's okay with Poppy, Gabriella, yes. And there are a number of councillors with the same last name, so it's always a frustration when it happens. Councillor Hale, please.
My issue is I'm a Darren with one R. Yeah, I've always listed as 2 R's. That's just pretty difficult. You don't always get emails sent to you. Get it wrong, so.
As a representative of an area called Dale Ward, I often get emails, "Dear Dale," or "Good morning, Mr. Ward," and he has taken a lot of blame in my part of the world, I must admit. So thank you very much for that,
Rightly
councillor.
so.
Thank you. So that then covers all of the bits and bobs, shall we say, and that does mean we can now move on to the agenda as proper and printed. If everybody's okay with the minutes as discussed.
Yep, yeah.
Thank you, everybody. So agenda item 4 is the HEYCA game plan. We have presenting it to us here today, Mayor Campbell and Steve Skelton. So if I could please hand over to the Mayor to introduce the item. Thank you very much.
Good day, everyone. Hope everyone's all good and well. I'm looking forward to a constructive scrutiny meeting today. Get the game plan. So what the game plan is, it's an oversight of what vision is for a better region. We see how do we see that working? Well, that's through create better jobs, create better connectivity, it's fit and healthy, and it's affordable homes. So there's no data or details with the game plan because it's an oversight of the vision is for it. And I welcome any questions on this.
Thank you very much, Mayor Campbell. Before I bring in members for the questions, as the investment lead, Steve Skelton, is there anything that you'd like to introduce at this juncture?
Yeah, I suppose there's a few points around process that might be coming up to start. So and thank for the opportunity to address the committee. Steve's got an advice to the combined authority. As the mayor said, the game plan provides that kind of overarching document, and other strategies will refer through to it. So there's mayoral priorities that were formed following the election are written into the strategy and will be reflected in all the things that we write. The purpose of this conversation, and we've had other conversations with local authorities, with public sector partners, the police, the NHS, with business representatives, with FE providers, AG providers, and that's both through sort of informal mechanisms and through formal advisory boards. I've all about trying to get feedback on what might be missing from this, what could we amplify, what in particular might help us go faster. So where are there contributions that people might play, that organisations might play that help us deliver on some of these objectives going forward. We'll take this feedback from the discussion today, alongside feedback from the business board, from the skills board, from some of the other engagements that we've had, and so update the document, bring it forward the new board to the HEYCA board for agreement. I think at that point we would expect it to be slightly more detailed. So when we have an app framework for consultation, with more data around sort of the plans for that. Where we have deliverables, we're trying to put a little bit more shape around that. The caveat in the introduction, I think, is worth us bearing in mind, which is we intentionally took the decision to try and put this document out at an early stage, and therefore it to do the organisation's form, structures, capacity, resources are still being formed, decisions still being taken. So there is some iteration between writing down what we hope to achieve, confirming we have the resources to do that, and then be able to give a little bit more clarity about when you that to go.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, Mayor. I think before I open it to questions, it is just worth noting that this game plan is the overriding and overarching strategic document that will dictate and deliver everything else this authority focuses on. It's effectively the equivalent of a manifesto. This is the promises, the pledges, the ambitions. This is what we're really be looking at now, and it's worth noting we will actually be having a briefing on this in February as well as a committee to measure progress, to measure things like deliverability, capturing certain measures such as how we are going forward and how often we would like this to be an element of our discussions, as well as no doubt feeding into everything we do. So if we move on to questions, having now fully understood the significance and severity of the item, Councillor Waring was the first to signal. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Mayor Campbell, I thought this was quite a good document. There's a lot of aspirations in here, and I like the idea of having, and I would like to see more of it, the key performance indicators where you can actually manage what is happening and see where the changes are, what the baseline is now, where we go in the future. there was a couple of issues I did want to raise. I can't find, I have been through it, but I can't find deprivation mentioned in this. And I think that certainly for a lot of the wards, sort of like Bridlington South, the wards in Hull, like Utchin Park, deprivation is a real driver of problems. And areas where we've got high levels of needs and skills, lack of skills within that area. And if we're going to move towards jobs, I think that's something that needs to be, I think it should have been mentioned in here, and it should have been mentioned that those areas are areas we're going to concentrate some effort on in getting those people in. And I really wanted to mention NEETs in particular, because the paperwork mentions NEETs as being 16 to 17. That's not what I would call the NEETs age group. I would actually see it younger than that, because I think there are some young people that are sort of 14, 15 that actually would qualify as not being in employment or education. And we're losing them very early. I think the measure at 16 to 17 is too narrow, and I would take that out to 24 years old, because that is an age group where I think in the most deprived areas, certainly in places like Utchin Park, where it drives a lot of the other problems in the area. And if we could get those people skilled up and working, we would reduce domestic abuse, we would reduce crime, we would reduce the influence of the organised crime groups that are in the area. So I love the focus on needs, but I think it needs to be wider, and it needs to be targeted in deprived areas.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that input, and Steve could add that input. I'm already working on that in the background, so I've been sitting down with the team over the last several months looking at the year career summit. Now that career summit, I think we should start with kids from year 8. I've always had the vision of, let's not tell the kids what's available in our region, what jobs are there. Let's show them. So it's about getting all the businesses on board where they can understand and actually show what they do, and then working with all schools across the region to actually bring kids in, show them what's actually available in this region, where they can go to what jobs and what they enjoy and things like that. But we need to be grabbing them kids from year 8. I think when you hit year 9, the mock exams, whatever else, and then go to year 11, year 12, obviously they're already taking their exams, and it's probably too late at that point. So I think it's key to get year 8. Also sitting down with the skills team as well this week, where we was discussing a skills employability passport. Now, I think the market in this area is only a little bit diluted, but I feel like we need one strong message. Actually, here's your results from your academic results from school, and here's actually your skills for what you're good at, hands-on, timekeeping, leadership. I think we're only getting scored on textbook smart skills, where we need to see something else where actually the employer look at something, actually, this kid's got to show leadership, show timekeeping, and a lot of other skills that are not getting through trying school and school. I think that's important for employers, so obviously we're working on that together to try and increase the people getting jobs and getting into work, and what need to be working with all schools across the whole region to be signed up to this for it to be effective. So we're working on things in the background. It's only last month we had a round table with all the top people from the ICT over there, NHS and education units, and teachers from Witherspoon, Bridlington, all discussing on how we can tackle this. So there's a lot of discussion going on in the background, but we rest assured, you might not see it in the game plan, but we are working on that.
Thank you. I could speak to the age point as well, because we've heard that before. I think it's a very valid point. It's a KPI that you can get data for. It's not the strategy. I think the strategy is you're suggesting to start from earlier ages, reaching to later ages. We are trying to work with existing data sets that are collected. I think that will change. That data set, the definition of it will change. They've already changed 40 now. And we will absolutely do the same thing and try and get broader range funds. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, councillor Waring. And I think we have our first two recommendations there, specifically deprivation, and if I may suggest, isolation strategies for all the key priorities. After all, employment, education, skills, transport, housing, and health and well-being are all captured in this document. I think councillor Waring's point that deprivation, if, as I say, if I may add isolation, are something that will sit with each of them. And I do believe this committee will endorse the fact they all require a specific focus. And the second point was perhaps it might be prudent for this committee to make representations to government on how data is captured and what measures are applied, specifically in relation to programmes targeting youth provision and supporting education as well as into employment. Ultimately, if government provides a measure and we don't think that it's actually capturing what we need it to, then we need to be telling them that. Thank you, councillor Waring. So next on my list, I have councillor Glad, please.
Thanks, Chair. We've got two questions or 2 points, if I may. I think it's a good document. These things are often can be quite dry, but I was particularly pleased to see on page 26 that there are a detailed list of outcomes that we expect to see. The first question is, can we see these outcomes populated with baseline data so that we know where we're starting from and we can see improvements from here, if that could be shared with the committee? The second question is, I think one area where there's a bit of a gap is in terms of the good jobs strategy is 18-year-olds. At the moment, when our 18-year-olds finish college or school A levels, we lose many of them to other universities around the country, and very often they don't come back. I can speak from personal experience. I got to 18, went to London and stayed in London for 34 years before retiring back. So I think either how do we retain our 18-year-olds in the city with the skills and the good jobs that they are looking for, or alternatively, obviously people do come to our to Bishop Burton, to our university and so on. How do we retain them in the area with their skills? Because I think that's an area that's not really dealt with in this report. So it's capturing the skills and opportunities of our 18-year-olds really.
I think a couple of thoughts on that. So baseline data, yes, absolutely. At this stage, I think at this stage we are just checking with people what some of the right indicators. We've had feedback on things like 17, we've had feedback on whether level 3 skills is the right indicator. And these are only indications of things, you don't need to pick certain measures, otherwise we'll be drowning in the data. But when we bring the final version forward, that will include the baseline data, and then as I would expect you will want to this committee can review that. I think, on behalf of the mayor, on behalf also of council leaders in general, we should all recognise that these sorts of outcome level measures are highly affected by macroeconomic changes, by social cultural change elsewhere, and it's not within the gift of any one organisational agency to necessarily drive substantively the change at population level. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have an eye on what good looks like for this region, and that's what this dashboard is about. On sort of graduate attraction, graduate retention, I'm sure we would all agree that's an indicator of a healthy kind of economy. I think we will see more on that in the growth plan in terms of the how. So some of that is about retaining either prior to university or after university more sort of skilled mobile people. They want access to high careers. They want access to transport links to places that they want to spend their time. So that's that range of kind of challenges we're talking to in the growth plan. And then in the kind of the local skills framework, the sort of skill strategies that we do, as you expect, that will talk to the role of that being in our certain economy, but also in areas like housing, the residential offer, making sure that is keeping pace with the wants and needs of that during the whole mobile population.
Thanks, Steve.
And on top of that, it's having that one strong voice for the region where we can bring investment in and create them opportunities so people don't have to go out of town and where stay here to provide good jobs for them. So that's key as well. Having that one strong voice that promote the region streamline investment to make it as easy as possible for investors to want to invest in this region and bring the jobs here. So they're gonna go with, that's the whole part of the whole plan.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, councillor Glenn. Thank you, gentlemen. Councillor Hill, you were next, please, and then councillor Bibb afterwards.
Yeah, probably going third is that Steve and Gary still some of your lines, isn't it? But the issue very much, I think, was around those issues such as deprivation. And I don't think it's wrong for a document like this to recognise the need, there will be a need for targeted interventions. There's certain communities that will need special attention because I sort of somewhat different. I think you can get carried away with needs, but let's be honest about it. Neat young people don't wake up, you know, it's not, you don't hear a grandfather that's working and a father that's working or a mother's working, or grandmother's working, and then the child suddenly gets sent and it doesn't work. In the ward I represent, it's multi-generational, third, fourth generation of locked in lack of economic activity, and that would need a targeted intervention that will last for a generation to turn that around. I mean, absolutely, you try and make a difference with young people because, you know, they're probably it's easier to turn that oil tank around, so to speak, than it is to say someone who has never worked. But it'd be really difficult to support that person into work if they're coming from an environment where there's not a tradition of work or there's not perhaps a neighbouring tradition of work. So I would hope that we are recognising that then there will be a need for targeted interventions in some of those stubborn where economic activity and unemployment and worklessness is at its highest. And that might be in Orchard Park, it might be in Bridlington, it might be in parts of Gilbert, it might be in the ward I represent, which is Old Hazel Road, you know, the old fishing community. And I think that's really important that we don't shy away from that, because I think that without recognising that, we run the risk of just it being words, because I think we have to remember that this document, it must be welcoming the document. I had a boss once who always said, read the document and then say, so what? The so what test, you know, what difference is it going to make? And what I would also just be pleasantly, just politely say is, when I read 34 and 36, and it talks about delivery plans, they're not delivery plans, they're statements of intent. And delivery plan is what you do, where I come from. I don't see having a conference or having an international investment summit as a delivery plan. That's just an action on the way to delivering something, in my view. I don't know if we can have a debate about semantics of words, but I think that as a statement of intent, that's fine. But the delivery plan, surely what sits below that, and it's both the, you know, as Steve said, you know, baseline, base set of KPIs, so you know where you're starting and where you're going to. But the going to is surely the plan, not just a statement of intents. And I think we need to perhaps, there's something else needs to sit below that. It's just part of the delivery plan, because that's not a delivery plan as I would understand it. So.
Well, offering to engage in a debate with me about a thesaurus, councillor Hale, makes you a very brave man indeed. But what I would say is that I do agree with you on the definition of the word plan. You follow it, it's like a recipe, something comes out the other end. To me, these came across as more as criteria rather than a plan. And so ultimately, the plans which you were alluding to at the beginning of your comments, something that we will need to see. We do have Councillor Mike Ross as the board member for the skills portfolio and Councillor Anne Handley as the investment strategy and growth, of which local growth plan is literally our next item. So there will be questions that will come up under those specific items. So I will bring in the Mayor and Steve now if there's any comments they wish to make on the points Councillor Hale raised. But I will concur that you need the criteria, then the plan, and we need to hit the right notes in the right order. So, Mayor,
Yeah, I
Steve.
mean, I'll just jump in first question there. I think you're absolutely right, you know, lead by example. And if your parents aren't working, then, you know, the children have potentially got a good chance of falling in that bracket of working. And we are doing stuff in this area to, you know, when we look at Connect to Work, that helps get people back into work and something to help with and get them back into work, back working. We are doing stuff in that area as well, but it's led by example, which I totally understand why you move on with that. And then the second question, I'll pass on.
Yeah, so on delivery plans, I mean, I think, I think there's a fairness in that question. As I sort of hinted at before, what we have at the moment is a statement of what we can commit to as we see the organisation forming. So as you'll be aware, we're still not at the stage where the organisation is set out to have a target structure, so we don't know its likely size, the likely maturity curve it will go through. And so what we absolutely did want to do is say, all these things will definitely happen by these days. Until we've got confidence. So hopefully we get the first situation out, get some more of that confirmation over November, December, and we'll come back and give a bit more clarity on what the business is. The only thing I would sort of flag, put a pin in for a future conversation is the committee's understanding of the combined authority or the mayoral strategic authority's role in delivery. So there are certain plans that you would expect to see in your local authority roles that perhaps we won't be bringing forward at the mayoral or the strategic authority level, because our role is to form the system, direct the investments in order that the local authorities, voluntary sector partners, the private sector can crack on and deliver. So there are certainly things that I'm sure when we will do some development, but a lot of what we are responsible for, our function system, is about setting that very clear and integrated regional strategic agenda. So it's just to put a pin in that, so I think we'll keep it in the that, because I think that tangible sense of what will happen as a result of this is absolutely the right place for Scrutiny to vote. It's just about who in the system is doing the delivery.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Hill, do you want to come back on any of that?
You waited for me to grab him off and reply to us. That's good.
I did indeed, yes.
Only that, we're not immune from out there, the public. This idea of the morality and the combined authority was sold to people that it would make a tangible difference for their lives. So, in a sense, there'll be a lot of scepticism out there, and people will want to see action, and they'll want to see movement, and they'll want to see progress towards what was promised. So I think that whether or not it's the local authorities' outputs or the combined authorities' outputs, people will want to see some outputs. Those are where I'm coming from, and they'll want to see, back to Steve's point, where did we start and what's changed? Whether it's government gets structured the same, isn't it? Is inflation going up and down, or unemployment rates going up and down? But we'll want to see, does it make a difference? Because that's what we do at a local authority level. We used to do, say, we used to say there's a gap in Hull between the amount of jobs that we're creating, the rest of the country is creating. How do we close that gap? It's those sort of things that the public can relate to. I think it's how we can show that this entire project makes a difference, because that's what they want to see.
Thank you, Councillor Hale. And as I said to you all at the last meeting, recommendations are the most important thing this committee undertakes. Ultimately, if we sit here and nod, it's exactly as Councillor Hale said earlier, the so what test. If we're not making recommendations, we're not actually providing any outputs. And so, as Councillor Hale has just said, in line with Councillor Glant's comments, it was to populate the outcomes table with baseline data and provide progress reports against key priorities, as well as highlighting the options, opportunities, and indeed, as Councillor Hale's just alluded to, the obstacles. And as everyone knows, I'm a fan of alliteration, and what I'll say there is tangible targeting as well is something that I'd be keen to make sure is brought to this committee on a regular basis for updates. So thank you, Councillor Hale. So I have Councillor Bibb next, and then after that I have Councillor Collinson, Estelle, and then McMurray. And Healy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I do welcome this. I think it's a very positive plan, but I was slightly disappointed that not much was mentioned in the game plan or the local growth plan on the fishing industry. Now, I hope you're all aware that Bridlington is the lobster and shellfish capital of Europe. I know our mayor was there last week, was it the week before, at the unveiling of a lobster sculpture, which was financed by a local business person, Leslie Jackson. So we thank her for that. But the fishing industry, it's a mainly generational family businesses, but they are struggling to attract new people in the industry. And as an industry, they often feel forgotten and ignored. So could I ask the mayor to give assurance that the fishing industry will not be forgotten by this authority, and every effort will be made to support and promote our fishing industry, which is vitally important to the local economy and the local community?
Yeah, no, of course, yeah. We'll have a chat at this, and we'll show that we aren't missing our local heritage is out in tree. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a point of definition, I think, and then, it will sit under what's called agri-food.
Okay.
So, which is, you'll see, we'll take the local growth plan discussion, but that's the whole kind of, the growth we will change.
On that note, thank you, councillor Bibb. This is the strategic document. The next one is the specific one. This point needs making under both agenda items. And so can I thank you for raising it there and ask that you do it again in about 45 minutes on the next agenda item as well, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much, councillor Bibb. Next on the list then would be, please, councillor Collinson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions and one or two comments. First of all, generally on the indices, which Councillor Gant was referring to earlier, how often can we expect? Do we anticipate these to be reported and recorded and measured and so on? I assume there'll be an annual report at least. Do we see the figures more often than that? Do we think, or?
Shall I take that, Chair?
Please.
So I think to some extent that's, because this is a new committee, a new authority, it's within the gift of the authority to kind of design services. So you might want to take the relevant indicators when you have the relevant portfolio audit here. Which I don't know the frequency of that or the nature of that report, or you might want to take a single point in the year, the whole kind of dashboard, and we'll do both. The key point that you sort of accurately noted is the data will only be updated on a certain cycle, which is usually and there's normally a lag. So we'll obviously be more than happy to present to you the best available data if we have it at a reasonable level. But it would need, the actual function of all that needs to keep pace with the recency of the data.
Okay, Chair. Well, I think some kind of suitable schedule needs to be sorted out for that, doesn't it? Under the Transport Authority, there's reference on page 24 to making the combined authority a fully established transport authority. So excuse my ignorance. This is some kind of legal entity, is it? An established transport authority.
That's right, yeah.
And at the moment, the whole City Council and the East Riding Council will also be transport authorities. There's some kind of smooth transfer of whatever the relevant things that has already been arranged and sorted out. So there'll be 3 transport authorities effectively.
So the local authorities, and I'll refer to my learned friend, but the local authorities will be highways authorities following the transfer, which is slightly different as to transport responsibilities.
Okay, so thank you. The only significant omission, in my opinion, there is a question of e-scooters. I mean, cycling's treated lightly in that section, but now liking scooters, I think they're great. I think the future of personal transport, and I want one. In fact, I want 2. I want a lightweight urban one, and I want a heavy duty cross country one. They're fabulous. I don't know if anyone else in here has been on them, but I just think they're great. However, as people will doubtless anticipate, certain controversies are associated with their use, and people talk about being illegal stuff, although I understand legal ones are now available, and if I can afford one, I'd have one. But anyway, in my opinion, they are going to be swarming all over, certainly the city streets in years to come. And I think it's probably something, whether you feel like me or not, that a stance needs to be taken on one way or another, because there are, physical risks, for instance, that the accident rate is going to go up and so on. So I was wondering if there were any thoughts about having some kind of strategy specifically with that aspect of transport in mind.
Before I bring in Stephen the Mayor, if I may, Councillor Collinson, I welcomed you to the committee about half an hour ago, and I can now say that you will definitely fit right in. At our work programme meeting a couple of weeks ago, we did specifically discuss, in fact, it was Councillor Jeffries who banged this drum the hardest, that transport will be at the crux of absolutely every service this authority delivers. You can't get to school, you can't get to work, you can't do any of the things without transport. And specifically the eligibility of transport options and enabling a variety of them. And so that is something that this committee wants to look at. And we will be having a briefing for 4 weeks today, actually, with Councillor David Tucker, who is the board member and relevant portfolio holder for transport. And the reason I jumped in before Steve and Luke could answer there is because I didn't want them to say, oh, that's up to Dave. If there's any comments you'd like to add on top, please, gentlemen, do feel free to do so. But the transport will be coming to us as a briefing so that we can decide what elements we'd like to include in our future work programme. And similarly, something else we discussed was how often to bring the game plan back when. As Steve said, it will be somewhat dictated by the data that's available to us and when that's provided, but also the regularity of it and the, for example, ability to provide updates on progress. And that's something that this committee discussed at great length 2 weeks ago, and it's something that we will be discussing at our next workshop in a couple of months' time.
Oh, thank you, Chair. That's,
So-
I'm satisfied.
Great minds think alike, councillor Collinson, and good to see it. And again, welcome. Steve, Mayor, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add at this junction.
Just to give a brief response to the question on kind of e-scooters and micro-mobility. Again, my understanding, and I will check with the governance and transport colleagues, but it's when the mayor is the transport authority, will have regulatory responsibility for micro-mobility, therefore will need a strategy to guide the discharge of those responsibilities. So that's a long way to say yes, that one to the team.
Thank you.
I think a couple of years.
And I think you'll have the formal transport authority, probably a year or so after this journey around.
That's before we even consider any potential policing powers that just got announced last week with things like pavement parking and obstruction of ability scooters, prams, wheelchairs. So there is a lot to encompass under the umbrella that is transport. So thank you, councillor Collinson, and that's something that I'm sure will take a very long time to go through in the detail it requires. Was there anything else, councillor Collins?
Yeah, just a couple more things. On page 43, there's a reference under fit and healthy to using our increased influence and forthcoming public health duty and so on. I mean, I hear the word influence, I think of money, but there are also, I mean, there's managerial influence in the decision making, things that drive change. How is it? What does this mean, increased influence? In what way is this show? How do we have extra influence? And once again, I speak as a personally largely took position of ignorance on this, but you know, like I say, I think of money and how much money is there? What does it mean?
Whilst
Was it going to be expressed?
well, there's no such thing as unacceptable ignorance. The only unacceptable thing is to not ask the question and get the information, councillor Collinson. So always welcome inquisition here. And Stephen, Luke, it must be a good question because they're thinking about it.
Well, I mean, these things have a theoretical value, but they also have a practical value, and I wonder where the practical. I mean, is there extra influence? How is that? Because we're not control of the health here, are we?
Yeah, I mean.
Our budget is going to be small.
Those things, you know, the NHS or anything like that, but what we can do is actively get people more moved in this region. So like all the community centres that have been decommissioned, why aren't we reopening them? Working with the voluntary sector, getting kids more active in sports, but not only sports, it's also education side of things as well. We can also deliver an education as well as sports within the community centres. We all identified that when I was young, community centres was thriving, and I took most of my childhood memories in a community centre playing darts or snooker and then falling into boxing myself. But that was for me, that was my childhood going places like that. Most of them now decommissioned. Why aren't we working together in our communities? These are the heart and soul of communities in my opinion. We need to get these back open, create safe places for kids to go and play, get sports in there, the voluntary sector, education units where we can actually teach kids all sorts of things as well. So that's we can control certain aspects, active lifestyle, you know, cycling, running. I'm waiting to collect all the data on all the council rankings because I feel like if we could have that data, we can associate it with the NHS, and we can then match the data to say actually in this location of the region where there's more activity in this, they're doing that, and it's keeping people out. It's keeping people from being sick and in work. So there's a lot of data that still needs to collect in that area, but there's so much we can do to have the influence in health, but also mental health as well in that places too, not just activity.
All right, thanks. I'm happy with that. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
The only other question I wanted to.
Well, if I may, councillor Collins,
Yeah.
just to say it's a very important subject, and my understanding is that the leaders and portfolio holders of both Holland East Riding Councils are actually in a health and tourism focused meeting right at this very moment in the Guildhall. It's benefiting health providers, as the Mayor just said. We can't necessarily affect GPs, doctors, dentists, hospitals, But it's worth noting in East Riding, every pound spent on leisure provision saves health providers £14 down the line by keeping them fit, healthy and active.
On top of that, we are actually just sat down 2 weeks ago where we are actually going to start working with GPs. They were actually sat at the round table a couple of weeks ago. The GPs were actually starting to incorporate and bring in, because they hold a hell of a lot of information that we can use to make our region better places, fit, healthier.
Thank you.
I very much welcome that, Chair, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I am obviously the portfolio holder as well for help. With certain things that I want to do, certain challenges in our kids, and the elderly to our parents, and get people moving again.
Thank you. Councillor Collins, I believe you have one more question.
Well, a couple more comments actually rather than questions. On page 47, the reference to health inequalities and harm from drug and alcohol use, I particularly welcome that. Chair, I do think it's an increasing problem, certainly in the part of the world where I live. So yeah, very happy with that, to see that. And the last question relates to the homes, but affordable homes. I'm just a little concerned that affordable homes equals cheap equals nasty. I don't think the housing standards in this country equate to those we find abroad. Some of the houses that have been put up in my part of the world are astonishingly small. And I do think the issue of quality needs to be addressed as well as affordability, really. It's all right sticking them, in various parts of the world, they've been using containers for people to live in. So we don't want to be going down that road. I think you want, yes, affordable homes, but decent ones as well. I think that needs to be emphasised on here, really.
We will be having Councillor Jackie Dadd, who is the relevant board member, coming in the early parts of next year to present to this committee. I think a sentiment we could all get behind would be homes, not houses. There should be somewhere to live, not just a property, and there should be lifetime homes as well. Doors wide enough to get wheelchairs through. If there's upstairs accommodation, the ability to easily fit a chairlift. And that is something that I have no doubt that this committee will explore in detail.
Furniture, Chair, yes.
Chair, can I just come on the back of
And
that?
a wiggle from Councillor Hale.
I'm really concerned. I absolutely concur with Councillor Collinson on that, because my real concern, and nationally, is that to reach, I think the government were right to set house building targets or home targets. My concern is that local authorities up and down the land, probably including 2 in this area, might try and reach those targets by HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy, because if you turn a hotel into a 122-bedded HMO, it's 120 new housing units. They're not homes, they're 4 metre by 3 metre, if you're lucky, rooms. And that's not a home, that's just a box, honestly. So I would hope that in this strategy, we're clear that we want proper homes for people and not just shoeboxes, really.
Thank you, Councillor Hale, and thank you, Councillor Collinson. I always like to see a debate sparked, and for your benefit, Councillor Collinson, I've brought in something I call the wiggle, which is if you have a question that's pertinent to an item under discussion, I do try to jump you up the queue to keep the ball on the rolling on the same track, rather than jumping back and forth. So if you've ever got a wiggle, please.
Councillor Randall was explaining the wiggle too.
Fantastic. It's a lot more dignified than gesticulating wildly as well. But it is worth noting, just before I move on to the next question then, which would be, Councillor Estelle, it is worth noting that the board is made up of 5 members, 4 of which are the leader and deputy leaders of the 2 local authorities, who in turn are responsible for the local plans. And so we will have the ear of those who need to hear it and the ability to raise our voices along this very point that both yourself and Councillor Hale have just made. So thank you, Councillor Hale, thank you, Councillor Collinson, and Councillor Astell, please, you're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the game plan sets out an encouraging direction. But as the people have already said, it does read more like a vision than a plan. And I think we need to be able to see what will be delivered, when, and also something that hasn't been mentioned at what cost as well. As far as I can see in the game plan, there isn't any of the baselines that we need for indicators. So what would have been good to have included in the report is things like what we've got in the next report, which is the economic assessment. And that provides a really good overview of how the region's doing. It would be good to understand some of the thought process behind how this has been structured, because whenever we're coming up with business plans in industry, we look at a SWOT analysis and an honest one as well. So what we're good at, what we're not so good at, where might have some opportunities to improve, and anything that might be a threat to what is in this game, because ultimately it's all well and good setting out a vision, but there's a big event coming up next week, and that could wipe a lot of this stuff out for what's being discussed in Westminster. So I think what we need to understand is how baseline indicators have shaped what is written in this. I'm also particularly concerned that rural and coastal communities feel somewhere lost between the lines. East Riding has significant housing, transport, and workforce challenges, and they need concrete interventions as well. It talks a lot in the report about inner city. I can't see as much reference as we have for inner city issues than or priorities than we do for the rural and coastal communities as well. I'd also like to see a strong commitment for young people, and I'm reiterating a lot of things that have already been said, but the consequence of coming sixth or wherever I am. We talk about career pathways, but there isn't actually there's very little detail on how young people's voices will influence decisions that are being made. I think one of the things that I would like to add in as a recommendation is that the board considers a youth advisory board, which I think would add a really clear way and structure for how young people can add their voice in. Similar to how Hull City Council's got its youth parliament, East Riding's got youth parliament representatives as well. And I think that is a really good way of how we can get young people's voices straight from them as well. And finally, I think the governance around investment prioritisation needs absolute scrutiny and transparency. I think scrutiny will want to see how decisions are being made and how they align with the actual needs across the whole region. I think that there is a lot of potential in the game plan, but I just think it lacks a bit of clarity. And I understand the point around it's a very new organisation, but we're 6 months in now to the authority, and it would be good. We've got the skeleton, as it were. We now need some flesh on the bones, and I know that that's coming along the way, but we need to have more baseline data. We need to have more. The overview on page 26 of the agenda pack, the outcomes framework, that is missing a column or a couple of columns where we've got baseline data and also when and at what cost. And I know it might be a bit of finger in the air at the minute, and that's absolutely fine, but we need to be able to have something to go on, because at the minute, all of this stuff could be achieved in 2, 3, 4 years' time, and it's going to be too little too late then. I want us to be able to achieve more now. I want to know what your time scales are. I know a lot of people want everything yesterday now, but there are some things that are quick wins in here, and it probably just needs to be highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor
Very
Stamp.
much.
Thank you for your input. I'm one of them people that honestly done this.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody else is the same as well, but the game plan, it is a vision. It's not really, it's the vision of what we want as the region. It's not backed with data or details. That would be the broad plan. There's way more data and detailing in the broad plan, but the game plan is just what's our ideal vision for the region.
There's a couple of technical points if I can. Yeah, so indicators absolutely recognise what's been raised before. We will have the final version, just kind of checking the that we've got the right ones. You mentioned budgets, so just to make the point that this is, you know, a delivery plan against the established, HEYCA budget, which was for last time, and will be again for in the new year. So when you scrutinise the Section 73 officer, then, you know, you will look at those. So,
I mean, if you're interested, now I can tell you exactly what's in the investment pot. It's actually very good, we're doing very well, we're £500,000 higher than what we thought we was going to be in. There's 11.7 million that's currently sat in the investment pot, which is currently still making money. And then £1 million community fund isn't even included in that, so that's already been put aside, so that's already set, ready to go as well. So we're in a better place than what everyone thought 3 months ago. So we're doing really well in that area. So that's a real bonus for us all. And then comes April next year, we'll be receiving our next yearly budget, should be 13.4 million. So it should be really, really healthy. A lot to get stuck into, and you know, a lot of investments we can make there that can actually create more jobs, better communities, better environments, and get people into work.
Just maybe a brief more around the investment framework. So, you know, the preparations are underway to spend that money wisely. So you're not rushing to spend it on stuff just because people want to see things done, but putting the right process in place to spend it wisely. That investment framework was talked about in the game plan. The point I wanted to add is it will be obviously entirely within keeping with the agreed and adopted assurance framework, which is publicly available, which sets the governance rules. So this will have some kind of policy flavour and direction. There are an existing set of rules in the civil assurance framework, which were agreed before the mayoral election and published on the website.
And just for rural and coastal communities, it's transport wise, well, they're the areas that I want to be present in first. You know, we understand the problems there in connectivity, and you know, it shouldn't take you 7 hours traveling by bus to get from one end to the other. That's just not acceptable. I'm already working with local community bus hubs like Hart in Hornsey and seeing all the good work they're doing. Now we're looking at is how can we implement that into more areas across our rural coastal communities. And I think it's exactly what Hart do. There's only so much pressure we can put on them before their organisation then gets too big for them. So there's a lot of work to be done. We're just going through data analysis at the moment, gap times for budget schedule. But you know, I want to digitally connect all the bus stops in rural and coastal communities. So we turn up bus stop. So the next bus is for 7 minutes. Sometimes you can turn up now and think, well, is it 3 hours until the next one? So but community buses will play a huge role within all the villages in the rural communities. And then there'll be fast streamlines where the big buses can get quickly from one place to another. So it's something that we press to show we are working on that. And you'll see that full deliverable plan, and I've had the opportunity to, you know, implement better ideas that we have.
That's great, thank you. Can I just ask one final question then? In terms of the delivery and timelines, what's the earliest visible improvement that a resident would go, Mayor Campbell did that for me?
I'm really
Like tangible, like actually this is benefiting my life. So you did that for me. What is the earliest thing that they're gonna be able to say?
I mean, that could mean many different things, but we will be delivering our community fund this month. So that's going to have an impact on our local communities as well. So I would say this month. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the transport funds are only different from the combined authority, which are helping. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Maine. Thank you, Councillor Ashton. I get a couple of recommendations from you there that I will bring up at the end. One thing I would add, and I'll bring in Councillor Healy next because of this very point, is that Councillor Healy and Councillor Gallant both had a quite detailed discussion on Monday at the pre-meeting about the issue of, are the documents for the sake of them? Are they just there to hold doors open in the summer? Or are they what will be the direction that will help fuel and direct progress and be the vehicle to provide that? And so I suppose to conclude there, Councillor Aspel, we will wait with bated breath, I've written here, for the processes, policies and strategy documents that will all come about as a result of this game plan being implemented. So this is the first step on the journey, and no pressure, gents, but it looking so far like the committee's seeing this as a step in the right direction, and it will be the journey that we go on as a result of it that'll be what this scrutiny committee will be most interested in seeing, because as Councillor Estelle has perfectly summarised there, that is what will direct what's delivered on the ground. So thank you. And on that note, then I've got Councillor Healy next, then Councillor McMurray, please.
That preamble, so what I was going to say. So in terms of applying scrutiny to the document itself, it's a strategic document from a strategic authority. And I've seen a lot of these documents over the years with being part of, the Regional Development Agency and business links and so on. And it does come back to what Darren was saying a little bit about, you read these documents and, they're well crafted in terms of words and aspiration. And the economic setting a scenario of where we are in all of these riding is very, very clearly done. But it's that point that you made, Darren, about, the so what factor in a way, because I often look at these documents and say, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And when are we trying to achieve them? Now, I think this is it's a game plan. So the idea is it's like a signpost. So you should be able to pick it up at any point over the coming years and say, well, this is what we said we were going to do. Where are we going to do it? How are we going to achieve it? And in terms of setting out the agenda, setting out the priorities and sectors, better connected, jobs, fit and healthy, affordable homes, it does that well. It sets out some baselines, but as we've already talked about, it needs the data behind them. So we're going to measure GVA per hour, you're going to measure gross median pay, you're going to measure business births, but you've got to have those numbers in there to be able to say at some point, how have we succeeded? Because this question that Tom just asked about, well, what is it that success looks like? We've got to be able to say that so that the mayor can say, well, yeah, we've increased business birth rates, we've increased qualifications at level 3, for our young people. So they've really got to be in there. And my worry sometimes is that, one well-crafted document with fine words leads to another. So, I mean, our first steps, for example, I like the first steps and the big steps. I think that's a good way of putting it. What are we going to do first? And then what are we going to do that's really important? But it's also important that the things that we're going to do are not just more talking and creating more talking shops. So on the investment portfolio delivery plan, our first steps will be to commission an updated regional economic assessment to identify our strengths and so on, where we can create good jobs. Our first steps will be to develop a 10-year plan for growth. These are more documents, these are more plans. But it's really important that we get beyond the plans, that we get some data to measure ourselves against, so that these documents can, come to life. I think it's a good roadmap. We must just keep to it, so that you, when you ask that question, Luke, can say, well, yeah, I have achieved these things as a combined authority. I've done this. It's a little bit frustrating because it is a strategic authority, and we all like to get things done, don't we? Because you want to get things done. You're a man of action. Yeah. As councillors, we are as well. And sometimes strategic documents like this, they have to happen because it's a combined mayoral strategic authority. So there's an expectation. The next document that we're looking at is a statutory thing. We've got to do it. But at the end of it all, we like to have action. And it's really important. I think it's summarising what we've all kind of said today. And 7 of us have pretty much said the same kind of thing. And you said it, Chair. And I feel, we're confident enough that we've made this point so that when we come back to it in however many months' time, that we can actually see some more meat on the bones on the skeleton that you just talked about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Healy. And I think I've got a commendation, a recognition and a stressing there for the recommendations at the end. So that would mean that our last question then, unless any late flurries of hands go up, would be Councillor McMurray. So thank you very much for your patience, and over to you, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to home in on the paragraph on page 37 of 124, which says continue lobbying for greater influence on citizens and education so responsible businesses need. It sort of would make sense if you had no awareness of the battle that's occurred in curriculum development for 100 years. And the thing that worries me about this and these sort of statements is that they seem to be completely ignorant of that which is taking place before, and I know a little bit about this because I was a teacher for 20 years, was a former NEET before that, third generation unemployed. And then I've studied curriculum development and education leadership. And to me, there's a massive, massive risk. And we've seen this with the change of FE. So if you look at what happened in FE over the last 10 years, with putting out the adult education, narrowing the curriculum, you talk about people who are NEET. And like in my example, third generation unemployed, leaving school enough qualifications, that narrowing of the curriculum and allowing business as much as it wants to dictate what it wants to make itself profitable, you cut away the opportunities to get people involved. So in my own example, it was my love of music that got me back into FE, because there was a broad curriculum, which meant there was something in my life that I did care about, and that was my hook into education. Now, after what the last previous government did in terms of funding a very, very narrow curriculum, it means you're taking away the opportunity for education to appeal to people. Now, I'm speaking from all perspectives because it's my own experience. We've got lots of young people who the idea of education is completely alien, the idea of work is completely alien, but they might love rugby, they might like DJing, they might like all these things. And what the status quo says is, or if they do like a degree in underwater basket weaving, you will have heard this before. But the truth is, most people who do vocational education, so for example, mechanics, will not end up becoming a mechanic. They'll end up doing something else. So on one hand, there's this really sort of dismissive view of curriculum in terms of it has to be relevant and it has to be great for this job. Well, that's fantastic. And so you train 1,000 people to do a job and then that job no longer exists. Do you know? And we know that the developments in AI are very quick. If you look at the development, the technological advances, even in China, they're delivering food in the sky from drone. Do you know, all of these things are happening really quickly. And if you allow business today to decide what our kids now are going to live for 80 years, learn and do, I think it's extremely, extremely problematic. Because ultimately you could have a scenario, we're already seeing we have call centres still in Hull because Hull can compete with India, do you know, in terms of staff costs. Are you going to let a call centre dictate what the curriculum is or what FE is or what the priority should be for FE? Now, there is a middle ground in all this, in that you encourage FE and HE to build stronger links with businesses. So, for example, I'll give you one example, the political degree at Hull University. People know if they do that degree, they're going to get a placement in the real world in that industry. And FE, as it's become more sort of managerial and more vocational focused, has done that to some degree. But if we're going to exert influence at all, it should be to say to FE, if you want these courses to run, then you have to make more effort with employers in those areas. So at least there's some sort of clear pathway, even if that means a certain business picks the best 5 kids out of that group. But what we should be saying, especially for those needs, we should be trying to influence the government to say, you need to broaden the curriculum to give people that hook, to get them involved in the first place. Because if you don't do that, and we've seen what's happened when you don't do that. Overnight in FE, 40% of the budget was destroyed. The curriculum was narrowed. It even came to the point that apprenticeship frameworks stopped using IT. So I don't know if people are aware of this, but if you're on an apprenticeship framework and you didn't get GCSE at school, you do functional skills, English, maths and IT. And then they removed the IT. Could you imagine, you know, in this technological age, to get a job, I need to be able to go on a computer, and they completely stripped that overnight. So I'm sort of invested a little bit in this debate on this particular issue because of the NEET thing, because of my background in education. But instead of influencing for a business to come and have a say on the future of our young people, we need to be influencing them. We need to be influencing the government to broaden the horizon. So the kid whose dad never worked, his granddad never worked, he gets up at 12 o'clock every single day. If there's anything in his life that gives him hope, that gives him joy, that we use that as a hook to do it. And you can only do that with a broader curriculum. Sorry about that one, guys, but yeah, thanks.
I know exactly what you're saying, and you know, we can look at the schooling system to, you know, we've never had to fill a bigger gap of skills before when people are leaving school. You know, there's the biggest unemployment rates out there at the moment. It's like you've got to work hard now to bridge that gap. But I could have the opportunity, if I was to change certain things in our schooling system, and that's exactly what I do, I would do, but obviously, unfortunately, that's advisory.
Well, what I would say there is that we've just had a very impassioned speech for our next year's work programme, and I have a sneaking suspicion that skills might be one of the earliest items on it there. And of course, Councillor Mike Ross, as leader of Hull and the portfolio holder for skills, will have to be working on delivery in this area. And as Councillor McMurray just highlighted, stressing certain things to government to give us the tools to deliver locally will be something that this committee will have the ability to enable the board to do. So that's something that I'm very much looking forward to now. Thank you, Councillor Mallory.
No problem.
Should be an interesting debate, that one. So are there any further items any members of the committee would wish to raise? Are there any concluding comments from either the mayor or from Steve that you'd like to bring up at this juncture?
Well, thank you, Chair and members, wish you all a good day.
Well, in that case, then I'll just go quickly through the recommendations. I've captured 7, and Kunwar, who's always very good at looking after myself in this committee, will, I'm sure, pick up any that he's noticed that I've missed. So the first one, and it was councillors Waring, Hale and Estelle all mentioned about deprivation, about isolation as well, we spoke about at the time, and the strategies needed for these, for all the key priorities: employment, education and skills, as Councillor Murray just alluded to, transport, housing, health and well-being, the 5 key areas of this authority. Making representations to government was the next point on how data is captured and what measures are applied, specifically in relation to programmes targeting youth provision and support and education, as well as into employment. And again, thank you, Councillor Murray, for really underlining that at the end there. The third one was to see populating outcomes tables with baseline data and provide progress reports against key priorities, as well as highlighting of opportunities, options and obstacles. And it was Councillor Glantz who made that point, and actually Councillor Estelle who reinforced it later on. Councillor Bibb brought up the strategic and the specific, and Councillor Hale brought up tangible targeting. However, I don't think that any recommendation on top of what I've just listed is needed to further cement those in. Councillor Estelle, you also mentioned delivery targets and progress reports to illustrate delivery progress. And I think that that is what we'll be looking at as we start to see strategy documents and policy documents coming forwards over the next weeks and months as we move forward. You also specifically suggested that we recommend the formation of a youth advisory board, and that actually wasn't debated further. So at this point, I will just ask the committee if that is something they're happy to support.
Yeah.
I see lots of nods. Fantastic. Councillor, please.
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth looking at the, I understand what you said about youth parliament, but actually within Hull, we actually have young people scrutiny. And they actually take council reports, council documents. And this evening, they're actually having a meeting with the Police and Crime Commissioner to question the Police and Crime Commissioner. So it might be worth popping Lisa Wareham and Marcus Wareham what happens there. It might be worth looking, you know, if somebody's already invented the wheel, let's not reinvent it. Let's see how we can use that to our advantage here. So that was the one thing. I think the other one is, and it's just come to me, and I'm sad that the mayor has left, but maybe there is the opportunity within the mayoral network for them to work together to influence the government on the curriculum and the needs of employment skills, and and how we book young people that are going into needs within that. And I just wonder whether or not that's something we could add to that. And as I'm sorry, but I'm sure that Steve's picked that up and would relay that back as well. Sorry, Chair.
They should support as well as helpful. There were discussions raised about expecting that to
Kunwar using his skill that I do not possess, which is for brevity. In fact, Kunwar, rather than put words in your mouth, if you could please.
No, I was just going to say through the chair that we will just put the most effective ways of engaging young people. So leave it to that and we'll explore. Your suggestion with Poppy's, how is using young people's scrutiny and then taking from that.
Yeah, no, so Chair, can I just clarify that recommendation? I would like to propose that the recommendation states a youth advisory board, as well as other appropriate ways that we can engage with.
What I was going to suggest the most effective ways of engaging with you people, such as the formation of a youth advisory board. What I will instead suggest, Councillor Estelle, is including the formation of a youth advisory board, something a bit more robust.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kunwar.
No.
Thank you, Councillor Randall. Councillor Murray, please.
What are we on
think there's a real danger in just having a generic youth advisory board. But you don't get the most out of it. If, say, for example, I'm going to go back to the NEAT example. If you was to try and learn more about the position of somebody who's in that scenario, you could tick a box and say, oh, we spoke to these young, none of them might be needs. So instead of just having a generic board, depending on what it is you're talking about or discussing, that it's relevant to that. So it's not just tokenistic, do you know? And I'm not saying that what we're doing the whole of the minute is tokenistic, because especially on children's scrutiny, we have groups of people who are looked after. So when you're talking about what's happened, it's relevant to. So I think this should be relevant and not just a generic board, and we think somehow speaks for everybody else, going to, you know, illustrate some sort of point that they might have no experience of whatsoever. So I like the idea of bringing young people in. I think wherever possible, it should be relevant to what it is you're discussing.
And can I concur with that? Because well, we had this argument, haven't we, about the Christian will know about the dear old people's panel that we have in Hull, which where you find there's no one from Orchard Park's on it and everyone from the avenues is on it. And the danger with that is that we try as we might, it's because people, that's what happened. So we just need to, and there's sometimes a bit of a feel of that about the young people's parliament, if I'm honest about it as well, in terms of it becoming a bit self-selecting. So, and it's not the fault of those people who are involved, brilliant, really pleased they are involved, but we do struggle to get that all generalist coverage. So I do
Strength, depth and breadth.
So I think that it shouldn't be one size fits all, because otherwise it's, oh, you know, it's the first Thursday of the month. Let's get the young person out of the cupboard and dust them down and then consult them, put them back in it. You know, there's a danger.
Then it wouldn't be passing the so what test.
Absolutely.
Councillor Estelle, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we needed a massive debate about this. I think we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. I would just say that, you know, as an ex-member of the Youth Parliament representing East Riding and being a member of the Youth Assembly, I'm a massive advocate for for you know, committees, boards, whatever like this. You know, we could say that, you know, in on paper, an overview and scrutiny committee might not be representative of the region that we've got, but yet, you know, we've got a diverse set of ages. We've got people from across the community and across the political spectrum and across the region, all coming together on one committee. So just to say that a youth advisory board wouldn't be representative of all young people could be, you know, it might not be, it could well be. And, you know, it's how you engage with young people that counts, and how you get them young people engaged into being members of that committee that is the most important thing. So, you know, I don't want to limit it to youth advisory board. That's not what is in the recommendation. I think it's something like that. So you've got something tangible that you can see and that you can engage with young people in a relatively easy way, but then also explore other areas, because not every young person will want to sit on a board. You know, not every young person will engage with things like that. You know, they probably couldn't give two hoops what Luke Campbell does, and they might not even know who he is, apart from he's a good boxer. Do you know what I mean? So
They won't know we are, Tom.
probably. Oh, they will definitely know who you are. Well, no, but yeah, you see the point, and I just think you know, there was something lacking in the report about engaging with young people, and actually, it's a real testament to the committee that we've had a little debate like this, and now we do engage with young people.
I said at our last meeting, at the first meeting of this committee, that there's more than a century's experience around this table, that we have people from all areas geographically, all age ranges, all walks of life, and that is one of, if not the greatest strengths of this very committee. Similarly, if we apply that to the discussion we're having, one element is you can't engage with young people if there isn't a forum through which they can engage. And also, that forum shouldn't be something I'm in charge of. It shouldn't be a talking shop. It should be of quality, and it should have that strength, that breadth and depth. It should have that diversity. And so it's not just, as Councillor Estelle and Councillor Randall have said, we need to create a vehicle, but as Councillors McMurray and Hale have said, to make sure that it's one that has actual value and adds value. And I think that that's been perfectly encapsulated in the debate there. So thank you, members. And then the very last point on the list was Councillor Healy's comments during the discussion, and that was to commend the roadmap that is the game plan, recognise the requirement for statutory documents, and stress that delivery must be at the heart of all things. And again, going back to Councillor Hale's point earlier, so that the so what test can be passed. If there's no point, what's the point? And so if all members are happy with that summation, and cool, I've not missed anything, fantastic. So with that in mind, members, I think we can conclude the agenda item there. And thank you very, very much for a very detailed discussion and for some positive as well as what I hope will be meaningful recommendations that will enable us to look at the specifics as we move forward and measure the success and progress of them. Now, our next item is the local growth plan. We have been going for 1 hour and 20 minutes, which is right on the cusp of people needing either more coffee or a quick break. So do we want to carry on, members, or do we want a couple of minute comfort break? Sure. I see everybody looking at the door, so a 5-minute comfort break, please, members. We'll come back in and agenda item 5 will be the local growth plan. Thank you. Welcome back, members. I just want to say thank you all for coming back, always good to see. But also thank you for, well, I'd say indulging me, but allowing me to indulge you to make sure the last item was really covered in the depth it deserved. Ultimately, our next item, and indeed everything this committee looks at, will be superfluous if the game plan isn't right. If we're following a path and it's in the wrong direction, it's not the yellow brick road, it's something much worse. So I do thank you for that. Scrutiny is job and knock. We do get to go home when the job is done, and it's much better to do it right the first time and take the time to do it right at that. So now our next agenda item is the local growth plan. So if I could please hand over to Steve Skelton to introduce the item.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I think as the mayor said, when he said to leave, the game plan was or it's the vision document. The local growth plan we've already from committee currently is a statutory document. It's a place that contains more analysis, more detail, and a bit more of a kind of a plan for how we want to or how we will see the world that we're trying to have a positive impact on. The introductory comment, I should also give apologies for the council and handling portfolio holders at an initial or instructions or sometimes and not able to attend. In terms of some sort of introductory comments to the local growth plan, I guess the first thing to clarify that it technically isn't a statutory responsibility yet, but it will be very shortly when the English Devolution Bill passes. Mayors will need to prepare a 10-year statutory local growth plan, and we were written to by government shortly after the mayoral election, I think, suggesting that we would seek to do that within around about a year, which we're on target to do. The local growth plan is a number of things. It needs to speak to the national policy agenda. It needs to dovetail with the national industrial strategy. It needs to present evidence of the core sectors that are going to drive growth in our region and drive growth in the particular way that government policy is interested in. So, you know, sectors with large concentrations, sectors with export potential, with innovation potential that can really make a game-changing impact to both our region and nationally, the UK PLC. It also needs to serve as a vehicle for us to prioritise our understanding of those things which constrain the economy, but which we will continue to need a very strong relationship with government to make progress on. So through devolution, we will require more skills and funding within the region, but we won't have our hands on everything, not all the powers, but all the funding we will need. So those small number of things that we want to prioritise, close ongoing joint working with government will be set in the growth plan. But I think most importantly, it needs to work for the region, tell a story to the region and to its stakeholders about the whole economy. So not just those areas of high growth, but how we will support, maintain and develop an economy which has all the hallmarks we would expect to see to deliver on those game plan objectives of prosperity and opportunity for all. So it will do those several things. At the moment, we are in the position of bringing forward a stage 1 consultation. And so just so you're clear what you have in your pack, you have a covering report which says many of the things I'm currently saying. You have a consultation document which includes, you know, a sort of a summary of some of the emerging thinking, some of the emerging likely structure, areas of focus, and some questions that we're interested in talking to people about. I'll come back to the consultation element. You have a summary of the first phase of the regional economic assessment, which is a number of slides which contain some high-level data, and you have a short sort of proportionate quality consideration report. The purpose of this first stage consultation is to check direction of travel, particularly to check some of the emerging thinking on sectors where we are trying to get a quite delicate balance of prioritising things which we think fit the government's sort of understanding of growth driving sectors, correctly identifying those things which have, you know, significant growth potential and also that are just core bedrock enablers of wider economic growth. So key sectors that are high employers that are necessary for other sectors to kind of grow and develop. And that kind of sector framework is a key part of this consultation, also to get some feedback on those binding constraints. The work we'll do in parallel with that consultation, actually just to touch on the nature of that consultation. So we're talking to you today. As with the game plan, we're also talking to our advisory committees, the business board, the skills board. We held this week what we call a policy sprint of 60 people. We were over at Aura from the local authorities, from public partners, businesses, voluntary sector representatives to work exactly these sorts of questions through in table discussions. And shortly, hopefully by the end of the week, possibly early next week, depending on the access to the website, we'll have a survey and a full regional economic assessment report on the HEYCA website, and people will have probably a month or so until Christmas to kind of answer that. There was some additional data. Whilst we're having that kind of conversation with the region, with yourselves and others, work is underway on the second phase of the regional economic assessment. That focuses mainly on a deep dive into those growth driving sectors. That's a lot of qualitative engagement. So going out, talking to businesses, understanding what their plans are. So the first phase can deal with the data as it's available, you know, what already exists, but what you don't necessarily know because people don't write it down is what they're thinking about next year. Where are they thinking about possible investments? Where are they thinking about the future direction of their industry? What would they like to say into the process qualitatively? And that second phase assessment will do that. We'll also progress our work on investment pipelines and, you know, further refine the sort of the policy thinking. So working on spatial growth distribution, on sort of the narrative that joins that kind of slightly dry economic bit of the plan to the conversation this committee is clearly very keen to have around targeting deprivation, targeting isolation, targeting the people in the region that really need to feel the benefits of growth. We will bring that together in the new year. I think you're due to receive the next iteration of this work in January, and then we will finalise that, bring it all together and bring it to a HEYCA board either just before or just after the re-election period in the year. So that allows us to meet the sort of 1 year sort of target set by the government. So that's hopefully an overview of what it is, what it needs to achieve, and how we're going about doing that. Now that we're coming to questions.
Thank you very much, Dave. So if I could open this up to members then. So far I've got councillors Jeffries, Collinson and Hale who've registered to speak. So councillor Jeffries, being first on the list, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Going to page 93 and onwards, Steve. We're talking about potential big pays, and I would like to comment on the 3 that you outlined in this document. First of all, the innovation, investment and enterprise, to my mind, is heavily reliant on changes we can make at Westminster level. So that means that we need to have strong partnerships with people at Westminster in order to facilitate change there. In terms of taxes to businesses, in the form of national insurance, increased wages, the no fault 12-month probation that no longer exists, entitlements that are immediately available upon employment, sick leave, etc., which put employers off employing further people. There could be a way around this, of course, by business companies employing new starters on a 6-monthly contract, where it begins and ends at the 6th month, and that would solve some of those problems. Another alternative is more overtime from present employers. They earn more money. But what happens is that instead of increasing employment, it's stifling the growth of the business. And in this country, small to medium businesses don't have the resilience to withstand changes in financial and employment restrictions and will go under. Large businesses do have that resilience to withstand these new restrictions, demands, whatever, and can move their businesses elsewhere, not just within the city, but overseas. So that concerns me. When we come to powering the energy and production transition, I wonder whether it's clear that at the present time, battery capacity to store the energy that we can't use, we can't keep up with that at all at this present moment. We can't keep up with the demands for developing that capacity. So developing even more grid capacity means that you're going to have transformers, step-down transformers, to store energy coming off a grid to convert it to 240 volts. All this takes time, and we don't even have it at the present time. So that it's like the cart before the horse syndrome. We've got to have the capacity to store it before adding more and more to the grid consumption. So that's the other concern that I have for those two, if you'll bear with me. Right, and of course the skills, health and connectivity for growth, going back to my big thing about transport, that can only happen when we've got the transport connections. So again, the cart before the horse, we must have those transport connections in place before we can increase skills, jobs, and health, etc., can take place. If you just bear with me for one moment while I just check that I haven't mentioned anything. The other thing that concerned me was food production. And I think that there's a question in question 3, I think it says what factors are at risk in your mind. And for me, food production is at risk in our area, and we need to give that greater thought and consideration. Just one moment. And there was question 5 about joint working across boundaries. And I would propose that working with Durham University would be a positive step, particularly in terms of medical research, which they do a great deal of in Durham University. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Chair. Steve, is there anything you want to come back with on that?
I mean, first to say that they're all exactly the sort of helpful points and comments that we're hoping for. So none of this is definite set in stone yet. This is kind of an opportunity for sort of feedback. There are some things as you acknowledge are outside the scope of your macroeconomic kind of taxation and workers' rights policies is not something, thankfully, that we have to kind of work directly on HEYCA. On the energy and transition, I mean, I think this is clearly a big play for the region. It is, as you say, an evolving network, significant investments being made, and the skill and the trick there is to make the investments at the right time, isn't it? To be ahead of the loop without having some cost into things which are not paying at the moment, and that's something which we benefit from sort of very substantial expertise through organisations like the Energy Board, we talk to frequently, and many of the large operators. I think that's an issue that can only really be guided by industry, from that sort of vantage point closer to some of those emerging investments to technologies. food production will be considered in the agri-food deep dive as part of the second phase of the regional economic assessment. So quite made earlier about fishing industry as well. But yeah, other than that, it's helpful to us.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, Councillor Jeffries. I've captured, I think, a couple of recommendations from that. And with Steve's last point being the fishing, I'm actually going to bring Councillor Bibb in here, just a couple of people early, just so that you can, I'm sure, bang that drum again, as I did request of you earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Barbara. I think that's an excellent contribution. The previous point was that I made in the last presentation is probably more relevant to this one, but I did want to get it in before Mayor Campbell left. But I would just like to ensure that there is specific mention given to industries that are really important in our coastal communities, like fishing and tourism as well, which I believe is worth £1 billion a year across the region. I think it's just important that these areas aren't overlooked, and can we please give them specific mention?
Thank you very much, Councillor Bibb. Steve, is there anything to add?
Just to reiterate, yes, that would be taking a closer look at that sort of those areas, well, particular fishing in the agri-food industry in the second phase of work. On tourism, we'll be working with the local district economy partnership to follow the piece of work, sort of potential sectors. So.
Thank you. I think it depends on your measure whether there's 6 or 8 questions here, because question 4 has 3 parts. But yes, on question 2, it says the 6 sectors. And I think what Councillor Bibb here is really highlighting as well is the need for clarity, for transparency and for accessibility. And I wouldn't look at agri-food and agri-tech and necessarily associate it with the fishing industry. And anything that can provide context, for example, to make this document tangible to any and all who read it and make it applicable to the local area is something I think that we can all support and endorse. Especially going back to Councillor Murray's comments earlier and making it actually accessible to people so they can engage. So thank you, and thank you, Councillor Bibb, for coming in a bit out of sequence there, but to keep the conversation flowing. So I had Councillor Collinson next, then Hale, and then Astle, please, and then after that, Waring. Thank you. Councillor Collinson, over to you.
Okay, so thank you. Well, you said you want to make things more tangible, all right. And the question, where are we? Page 101, 14, question 4B. Views on which people focus constraints most limit growth. And I think there is an elephant missing here, which is who's going to do the crap jobs? Because I think we're actually quite good at creating work in this part of the world, in this country, generally speaking. The difficulty has been for a lot of local industries finding people who can do the jobs that we're creating. I think particularly the food processing industries involved. And for illustration purposes of what I'm talking about, I know that there, for instance, the biggest private sector employer involved for a long time was a cake making factory. People working in there were employed to put cake decorations on fairy cakes in the same place, in the same orientation. For 4 hours at a time, we would put these cake decorations on as little fairy cakes. So you get a 15-minute break, and then you do the same thing for another 4 hours. Similarly, in a meat processing factory nearby, people are taking sausages 4 at a time from a conveyor belt where they're being produced. They put them in one side of a box. Well, 4 more sausages another side of the box, move the box to another conveyor belt. That 4 hours at a time, 7 times a minute. You then get a 15-minute break, then you come back to do it for another 4 hours. When I started driving my taxi round home 30 odd years ago, we were taking foreign workers at 4 o'clock in the morning to Driffield 4 at a time in our taxi. And my fellow colleagues in the taxi driving fraternity used to complain about these foreigners taking our jobs. To which my response was, who in Hull wants to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, drive all the way to Driffield and spend all day gutting chickens? Nobody. I didn't want to do it. My children wouldn't want to do it. Their mum wouldn't want them doing it. The same applies now. People don't want their children going off to the factories and spending all day putting decorations on kit. This is where the Eastern Europeans come in. Foreign workers generally. This is where the workforce has come from, which has driven the success, the permanence of these buildings. The many cake factories struggled for decades. Years changed hands repeatedly until the Poles joined the European community. All of a sudden, we've got all these cheap Eastern European labour force coming in doing the work. They could operate 24 hours a day. They've got now a sustainable business. And my question is here, and it isn't mentioned in this document really, is where are the people going to come from who are going to do the less skilled jobs, the less popular jobs, that the local people are not going to do? There's quite a few of them are unemployed, frankly, but most don't want to do that sort of stuff. So far, they've been coming from abroad. This, I think, is possibly a challenge for the mayor, particularly, sometimes. And it needs addressing as well. If we aren't going to get these workforces from Eastern Europe, as the rest of the Commonwealth and so on, as has been the case in the past very frequently, that we need to drive the local growth. And in my part of work, by the way, where I have a visible difference on the local economy, because Beverley Road, this is a major high street in a medium-sized city, was degenerated for years, decades. Some buildings have been left as commercial buildings, left so empty for so long, they've actually fallen apart. And it wasn't until the Eastern European population started, we saw this economic regeneration. These buildings, these communities have been brought back to life by the immigrants and by the cheap labour. So what are we going to do to bring the workers here? And that is a question I think does need dealing with, does need addressing, and is conspicuously absent from this document.
I'd suggest Councillor Randall had her crystal ball in action earlier when she said that we might need to declare interests as the meeting progresses. My first job out of university was working at that cake factory with my pink hair, rubber clogs and minimum wage. So when you did say they struggled, I was probably the reason as to why.
How did you find it? I hated that sort of work and was no good at it. I got sacked repeatedly.
I must admit, I quite enjoyed it actually. It was tangible, and I got to have cake on my breaks. But yes, I don't know if that's a declaration of interest worthy comment, but yes, I did used to work there. If I may, before I bring Steve in, it's probably worth noting that there is a lot of talk about quality jobs, about improving the quantity of quality jobs in this report. There's not necessarily comments on filling of all jobs and of all types of jobs. And it's worth noting, I think Councillor Collinson, the point you're making is they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, so honestly, we're going to expand on our existing industries inevitably. I mean, that's what's going to work. And we have to face the reality. There's a lot of jobs in things like food processing, which is one of the areas we're more prominently nationally. Inevitably, the jobs I now call them without prejudice, crap jobs. I've done most of it, you know.
I'm doing one right now.
I have been taxi driving. That's long hours for not a lot of money. You could conceivably call crap. I didn't mind taxi driving actually, partly because no one would employ me anyway. So you know.
Could I ask?
Yeah.
Could I ask
Thank you.
of Steve then, if there's
self-employment was kind of driven, but yeah, there we are.
Well, could I ask of Steve then, if there's any comments you wish to make, please do so. But as you've already pointed out in your introduction, this will be coming back for a phase 2. And actually it was touched on by Councillor Jeffries earlier, that there will be things that we would like to look at, the engagement and the consultation, the results of that and how they're going to steer any plans that come out. But also, as Steve alluded to earlier, any hurdles that are presented our way due to obligations or legislation. And so it might be that if when this comes back to us in January to look at those types of things, could ask that this be incorporated with any reports and part of any decision making that we can assist with. After all, our role is to be a critical friend, and if we can make these points, that's what we're here to do, to strengthen and broaden the board's interpretation and to make sure that nothing falls through the gaps. So if you're happy with that, Councillor Collinson, would that be something that we could bring back in January when we look at this?
I'll think so, Chair, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. And Steve, is that okay with you?
Yes, I think the very pertinent point there is about how the growth plan addresses that issue. And for me, it sits between the growth plan and the prosperity strategy. So you know, if you were to take a kind of a really dry look at that sort of question, you would say, well, actually what we want is that, you know, additional investment, recapitalising businesses, those are low value jobs. We're trying to increase the GVA, and actually it's a positive if we could see you know, the businesses survive and flourish with less human labour. If we look at the prosperity strategy, we absolutely accept that there are parts of our population where people you know, will benefit from having access to that employment. And it is in the the back and forth between the two, with the, or committee and others, the line authority of the whole will need to come to a kind of a policy position on that. And is, in essence, exactly the process that we'll be for the next sort of 6 months and beyond. What economy do we believe best fits the region's ambitions? Is it one which is requires higher labour at lower value jobs, or is it what that can transition it to profitable business base that uses less human labour as an input? And I would want to litigate that here and now. I'll do that in the day, very much one that political leaders will want to have their confirmed.
Thank you. So, as I say, then seeing that encapsulated in January, and especially as you say, Steve, the local growth plan and the prosperity strategy, covering it from all sides. With that in mind, Councillor Jeffries, you'd like a wiggle?
Thank you, Chair. It surprises me, Steve, that there isn't the technology being developed or even thought of to do such things as the repetitive movements of placing a design on cake in a precise manner each time and gutting chickens in this day and age. I wonder whether that's something that the board can recommend. Development of technology. It's out there, it must be out there.
Hull is, I believe, the AI capital of the United Kingdom, and there's plenty of opportunity to invest in improving technology and delivering that sort of thing, and to enhance the working environment rather than replace it. And ultimately, I believe that will also be part of our future discussions when we look at, because one of your earlier points, Councillor Jeffries, about infrastructure investments and the prioritisation equation, i.e. making sure the horse is before the carts. And ultimately, I would say infrastructure could be road and transport links. It could be actually investing in technology and machinery. It is the infrastructure. Excuse me. So if I encapsulate that into your previous recommendation, would that be okay, Councillor Jeffries? Thank you. So we have 3 more councillors on my list thus far, and that was Councillors Hale, Estelle and Waring, and that's order, please. And then Healy. So Councillor Hale, please.
Yeah, I was a bit concerned on page 91 in terms of the forward. I know some sort of this Hull East Yorkshire today. It goes on about public transport accessibility is uneven, with many rural communities falling outside the 45 to 65 minute reach of employment. Probably absolutely true, so, but it's not about whether you fall. It's just about whether you fall outside the public transport. It's whether you need public transport, because that's what the world that comes down to accessibility and car ownership. So I haven't seen the refresh census figures, but the last ones I did see, 40% of people in Hull don't have access to a car. That, when access to a car, I mean one in the household. So if the person who uses that car has gone to work in it, then you don't have access to the car. And in the ward I represent, Boulevard Academy, which is sited on the old Hull FC ground, the school that was built there, they surveyed kids, 68 to 70% of kids that go to that school do not have access to a car. So against that backdrop, actually transport links in inner city areas are equally as important, if not more so, because there are, I'm sure, some East Riding communities where they probably have given up having to rely on the bus because there isn't one. So therefore, people who are either probably imprisoned there, who lived there before buses stopped coming, but you wouldn't move there if you had a choice. Whereas in our community, people don't have a choice, a lot of them. So I think that needs to be just to make it a public transport accessibility in terms of a rural link is a bit possibly only telling half the story. What I'd also say was it's very interesting because you can, and Councillor Robinson will attest to this, you can stand on Prince's Avenue and wait half an hour for a bus at 7 in the morning. So, and then you get passed by 2 service buses, one going to Amazon, one going to Red, because those people can't get there. Staff buses, they can't get there relying on public transport. So that those employers have had to put transport arrangements in, which in one way is a good thing. What's very interesting, and I rather backs up Councillor Collinson's point, was when the Amazon bus went past, everybody on that bus was BAME. And you can say, how do you know? Well, I can tell you how you know, because they were all from certain ethnic groups. So that reinforces the view that certain people with a more indigenous Hull population weren't getting up to go to work in those. So it does reinforce Councillor Collinson's point. But the point I would say was, with that in mind, it's really important that this is a sustainable growth plan. So some of the economic investment decisions take account of public transport. I could make the point about this place. It's not necessarily at the epicenter of public transport accessibility. I did see a bus, but I'm not sure most people who work here necessarily rely on public transport because of where we are. So I think that those investment decisions, and you could get me onto Welton, or whatever it's called, where effectively there is no meaningful public transport, which means that people that used to live in my ward and have good jobs at Smith and Nephew and walk to work, who didn't have access to a transport, have left. So they are now part of that workless group, having took redundancy, and if their jobs exist, they're filled by other people in other communities. So it is about that connectivity between ensuring that our investment decisions, transport, and it's your point, Barbara, transport and economic decisions go hand in hand. If we are going to be strategic, it's absolutely imperative. I think Barbara's point about energy connectivity is absolutely crucial as well, because we're not always masters of our own castle. So when we in Hull developed Humber Street, we couldn't start it because there was no power, because it was a dock. There was no need for electricity. There was no electricity power on that side of the marina. Nothing like enough to power hundreds and hundreds of new houses and businesses. But we couldn't start with Whitecombe Beer and everything else until the electricity generator put in a new substation to be able to make the development add up. So, and the delays on that scheme were the delays with them, because it's a bit like the worst builder you've ever had. We need this tomorrow, you can have it when we're having it, and that's in 6 months' time. So it's that sort of issue. So the planning of those infrastructural investments, as Barbara said, are crucial to those developments, because for the best will in the world, if we hadn't got agreement with what are they called? They're called the National Public Grid people, whatever they're called, that wouldn't have been able to happen. And that took a lot of arm twisting and banging of heads together. And probably, with the best will in the world, the effort we put in probably meant someone else got kicked back in the queue, because there isn't enough staff in that sector to actually service demand. So I would say sustainable growth's got to be about the connectivity of the power and the infrastructure going in to power the schemes, but equally that the transport links going at the same time.
Well, that's the best recommendation this committee will ever have, and that is making sure that the people in this part of the world get put first. And I would like to second that, Councillor Hale, and wholeheartedly endorse you. But on a more serious note, you have sparked a bit of a discussion there, because both Councillors Gallant and Randall would like a wiggle. So in that order, please.
To Councillor Hale's point about 40% of households not having access to a car in Hull. In parts of East Riding, it's almost absolutely essential that you have access to a car in order to get to work. And I don't mean necessarily very outlying remote villages in the Wolds. You only have to go to Paul, just out in my ward. It's right next to Salt End, one of the biggest employment in the equivalent. Local transport, public transport in Paul amounts to 2 buses a day, one first thing in the morning and one after tea in the evening. So it's not practical local transport in terms of getting you to work. So in a lot of East Riding villages, you have to have a car to be mobile at all, or you're more or less trapped in the village, really. Which if you're an OAP and you just want to nip to Asda, fine, you can. But if you want to actually get to work and have a job, it's extremely difficult. So the challenge, even between East Hull and Paul, they're only 4 or 5 miles apart, but they're completely different challenges in terms of the need for transport.
Thank you, Councillor Gallant, and Councillor Randall, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much building on what Darren has said. To get from one side of Hull to the other side of Hull is 2 buses. So you have to go into the city centre, you have to come out of the city centre. So where you're talking about 40 to 60 minutes within a rural environment, it can actually take you an hour and a half to get across Hull. So I think that is something that, while I appreciate that rural is being highlighted within this, I think the fact that, to go 6 miles from one side of the city So the other side of the city can actually take you longer than it takes to get from the city centre to York is something that we also need to make be aware of within this transport strategy, because, you know, if we are talking about building industry, we're talking about building investment, you know, it's for all of the residents of this area. It's not just for those who can access transport. It's not just for those who have a level 3 qualification. And I think the other thing that's not mentioned in here at all is, and we're talking about connectivity, is Wi-Fi and digital connectivity and the influence that we can have on that. And I think that's something that's really missing within the report.
Good point. Thank you, Councillor Randall, and I can hear echoes of good points, especially on that connectivity element, whether it's digital, energy or transport. And so I'm just writing all those down for the recommendations. It's also worth noting that while we're on the subject of transport in particular, redundancy is another issue. It seems rather, well, it doesn't seem very sensible to me to have a train that runs along the A63 corridor and a bus that runs along the A63 corridor, when that bus could actually be used in town to get people from the train station to wherever they need to be, or it could be used in the rural areas to get people to the train station. And whilst there will be people that don't benefit from that approach, I'm thinking of people with a free bus pass, and so there will be some detriment to that. In the issue in the interest of the greater good, is it better to have a more connected transport provision than a more accessible one? And there will be balances to strike in a world of infinite wants and finite resources. So no pressure, Steve, but good luck.
I think probably, I mean, all I will say, thankfully, is it's not my job to set the local transport plan. The evidence for which will be scrutinised and crawled over endlessly, quite appropriately. It is perhaps second only to housing, the one sort of service area which everybody has, you know, direct and, you know, very substantial experience of, and will want to bring that to bear. So what we have in here is some initial indicators which are principally about the feasibility of taking public transport to get to work. So less about whether a bus every half an hour is okay, or more about is the bus there, and that's the only indicator for sort of use at this stage. The heavy lifting on this will be done through the process that Congress will need to develop a full local transport plan, which is a very substantial commitment and something we want to engage with.
Well, I must admit that does fall slightly outside the scope of what today, or what the local growth plan discussion should be today. However, ultimately, if you can't get to work or you can't get to education, everything else becomes superfluous. And so one of the recommendations that I've just jotted down is that ask that the local growth plan and the prosperity strategy highlight the transport needs that will affect delivery, and the partnership working across the portfolios will be essential, because what Steve's here to talk about today can't be delivered without addressing all the points that we've just raised. And so whilst it's outside of the scope, it is most definitely pertinent to the subject on the table in front of us. So with that in mind, thank you very much, members. And if we move back onto the list of people, sorry? I was going to say, if we move back onto the list of speakers who actually wanted to bring up points, it was next on my list was Councillor Astell, then Waring, then Healy. So Councillor Astell, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and just to bring us back on topic slightly.
Thank you.
I think there's glaring omission in this report. And I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier on, in terms of there's been quite a lot of reports produced. It's a new combined authority, a lot of reports that are produced don't really marry up with each other. There was a report produced by the combined authority in September last year, I believe, 2024. Yeah, September 2024, and it's the HEYCA Economic Strategy Framework. Now, within this, it talks about I can give you the page. I can't give you the page. I'll the numbers. But there is a section in there that talks about providing integrated business support and encouraging new startups and entrepreneurialism. And it talks about, and this is a staggering stat, given that it's not mentioned at all in this local growth plan, the Hull and East Yorkshire economy is characterised by its prevalence of SME, small medium enterprise businesses. Micro and small businesses, which are between 10 and 49 employees, account for 98% of all private sector enterprises in the area. 98% is not talked about once in this report. And it then goes on to say, therefore, a detailed understanding of the barriers to growth for these businesses and delivery of business support interventions to sustain them and help them upscale will be critical to the growth of the area's economy. And it's not mentioned at all in this report. Allied to this, the entrepreneurial culture present in all parts of the area must be nurtured and sustained. This will involve encouraging enterprise skills and attitudes and recognising the contribution that enterprise activity can make to people's lives, particularly amongst young people. I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that there is a danger with all of these reports and plans that they do not talk to each other. And that has been clearly identified here, that we've got a local growth plan that doesn't talk about SMEs in detail. And it focuses on industrial clusters. And that is great. And we need that big growth and that big investment. And as investment leads, Steve, I'm sure that you're focused on that big investment. But when 98% of all of our businesses are SMEs, they cannot be forgotten in the local growth plan. Right now, it just feels that it's very heavily weighted towards the large industrial clusters. And I know that this is a stage 1 consultation, and I think this is the whole point of bringing it here so that you can identify the areas that are missing. And I hope that in January, there will be a whole section dedicated to SMEs and what the combined authority will be doing to support SMEs. Because high streets in Beverley, Bridlington, Driffield, Goole, and in Hull as well, on the estates and in the city centre, generate enormous local economic churn through small and independent businesses. And just to link it back into the last point, if we focus on small and medium enterprise businesses, whilst the transport plan and everything else is being developed, then actually people do have options in their local area. They don't need to travel great distances. And that's one of the brilliant things about SMEs, that they tend to be rooted in their local communities. And also, the economic output isn't distributed outside of the area. It's self-contained. It's making money in the area that's redirected into the area as well. So I think what's missing in the report is some kind of productivity strategy for SMEs. Looking at high streets again, they're not mentioned, but we have, loads of high streets across the area, dozens of high streets. Hospitality support, we've got a massive hospitality sector. Areas that could be developed, in terms of how we can, we all experienced the massive economic boom that was Coldplay that came to Hull earlier this year. Well, how do we attract more of that kind of thing? How do we support culture, in terms of driving economic growth? Basically, last year's, was it last year's quarter for economic GDP nationally was held above recession level, purely down to the fact that Taylor Swift was in the UK. And that is the only reason as to why the country did not go into recession levels last year. Massive potential for culture. And also supporting micro businesses. I could go on and on and on and on. I'm sure you're hearing it. It needs to be in the plan next time, please. Otherwise, we'll be having a different discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor
That's a strong
Isbell.
recommendation.
I think that's a recommendation, that Chair.
I think I managed to capture that we should be adding
Yeah.
weight to SMEs and high street prosperity, both engagement and support, as well as keep the pound local initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that we need an SME strategy within this plan. Or whatever it comes out with. I don't want us to just start pulling strategies out of the air, because I know that's essentially how what's led to this. We already had economic framework that's not really fed into this, and I don't actually think the economic framework's even spoken about in the plan as well. I don't know, it's obviously a slightly different document, but I will let you come back on this.
So, very clear recommendation, very well made. I think there's a few points in that. I mean, first, give you assurance on the continuity with the policy. So the Hay Economic Framework, absolutely, something that I've read that we've all read that's featured in our kind of thinking, and effectively we have the benefit of the primary author of that report is held to combine authority works alongside us, so we haven't lost any of that. The point about SMEs, it is a good point. A little bit of why it's not there is because we focus on sectors rather than business sides. So the presentation of information in this consultation is a kind of a vertical one rather than horizontal. The evidence base that underpins it is clear about that point and marries up with exactly because it's used effectively the same data that is used in the Hay framework. But I think your point that it needs to come through in the narrative and in our story about our economy is well made, and a point that was made to us and one we will address. And there are some economic interventions and support programs that we want to put into place or continue that are working well already, which are common to SMEs as SMEs, even if they're doing very different things. And I think there's a challenge with an economy that has a high proportion of SMEs in that they can often be quite easy. It's not easy to get stuck. It's a lot harder to perhaps have the capacity, the bandwidth, the risk appetite to invest, to grow, to maintain, and therefore, when it comes to the growth strategy, it's hard to back investments in SMEs as a trajectory and a route to growth because they are tens of thousands of different people with different drivers, many making choices which are as much about lifestyle as they are about their contribution to the economy. So we need a story, we need to work out what that is. The only pin I will put in our future conversation is that this cannot be all things to all people. And as an example, high streets, whilst we might mention them, there is not a route to substantial transformational economic growth that runs through high streets. We all shop differently, we all consume and travel differently, and the nature of the high street in the UK at the moment is in transition. It needs to respond to those sort of changes. It needs public sector support, but it needs to become a different thing and reinvigorating the high street in the way many of us remember it is highly likely to feature the restaurant.
Can I just come back?
Well, what I'd say on that, Councillor Estelle, is that viewing these wide-reaching documents at this early stage means that we do need to stress our points, and indeed, we therefore need to provide that clarity, to explain the validity. Now, normally, I'd be very keen in the chair to turn around to people and say, please ask your question, get your answer, ask your supplementary. But because these are strategic, wide-ranging documents, and because it is so early, this is our chance to help direct it. So not only would I like you to come back, and I'd encourage it, Councillor Estelle, please.
Thank you very much, Chair.
But that
was a long-winded way of saying yes, of course.
That was also with a view to saying that I'm being generous, and please don't expect this kind of free reign in future.
I think, I take your point that you've gone sort of what is it, vertical, not horizontal, and that's fine. I personally think, as a member of the Scrutiny Committee, you have gone in the wrong angle here, because that's fair enough. But when we're talking about, say, energy, for example, how can you compare an SME fitting heat pumps with Siemens? They're completely different kettles of fish, and require completely different levels of support and a completely different level of obviously interaction from the MCA. And I think there is an element where we need to have a specific section on support for SMEs. And that might well be working with local authorities that provide business support. That's absolutely fine. But, and again, with high streets, yes, we're in a period of transition, but I can guarantee if there was a consultation around the local economy, one of the biggest things that would come up is that the high streets are crumbling. And if Mayor Campbell was sat next to you now with this, I can guarantee that he'd want to be pleasing kind of people that come up with these things. And I know that they're not easy solutions, but there are things that we can do. And there's been examples from Hull and East Riding councils that allow us, that could be a benchmark for how the combined authority can invest in high streets. And that's it. But I do think, I think a recommendation to some kind of SME level would be, I think it's needed.
So if I could bring in councillor Glanson and councillor Jeffries with a wiggle, then we have councillors Healy and Waring, or Waring and Healy, sorry. So councillor Glanson.
On councillor Estell's point, I think SMEs is really key to the economy in this area, because there's a huge number of people who are self-employed and run their own business. And the economy is very reliant on those businesses. But just to be realistic though, a lot of them are, whether it's self-employed, hairdresser, taxi driver, plumber, electrician, a lot of them, they're utilising their own skills, running their own business, but they don't really have an opportunity to grow in that sense. There's only so many hours a week they can do. When I was chair of school governors a few years ago, it was very frustrating that so many of the sixth form or students coming to the end of their school career, they didn't really have a vision about what they could do, because they simply thought, I'll go and work for my dad. My dad's an electrician, I'll be an electrician. It actually was it stalled ambition in a way, because they thought they could, my dad's a plumber, my dad's an electrician, he'll take me on. I don't need to worry about thinking about how I develop my career. So there is a limit, I think, in terms of what SMEs can do in terms of growth, which is what we're actually talking about here. So I think there's some businesses in this sector, you mentioned hospitality, certainly one. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who are self-employed, and that's what they wish to do, and they're not really going to be able to drive growth for us or employment prospects other than perhaps in their own families. So I think that's a limiting factor on the SMEs.
Something for the January meeting to find a balance on there. So again, good luck to you, Steve. And councillor Jeffries, you also wanted to wiggle before I bring in councillor Waring.
I did, Chair. I was just thinking, doesn't that go on the back of what I brought up about the lack of resilience of small and medium businesses to financial regulations and employer demands and so forth? And that's something that we need to look at. That would have to work in conjunction with Westminster in order to change some of the laws. And you said that that wasn't a possibility. You didn't think. Stage.
Like actually the last bit, I heard the first bit referring back to the previous question, and then the bit you said that suggested there wasn't a possibility I didn't cap.
When I mentioned about small and medium businesses being the backbone of the country, that they were the least resilient to changes of regulations, financial and employer regulations, and were more likely to go under than large businesses, and that it needed a partnership with Westminster in order to change the legislation. And you didn't think it was a possibility?
I mean, I think if we look at the current government's policy in this area, it is, we've obviously seen increased employer NIC, national insurance contributions. We've seen steps to improve employment provisions for people in work. I suspect there's little we could do to change the government's policy position, which reflects in part the manifesto.
It doesn't stop us from making representations, though, and in an effort to capture councillor Twell's original points as well as councillor Jeffries, and indeed the element that councillor Glan brought, I've written down: keep doors open as well as build more doors, because we can't have a growing economy if businesses are shutting down, and that's about supporting the businesses we have, as councillor Estelle said, but actually creating opportunity, building more doors, as councillor Glan said. So there's two elements to the same thing. Otherwise, growth will go in the wrong direction. But thank you to you three all there again for putting some meat on the bones here and ensuring that our lead officers are able to help advise the board on what it is that Scrutiny's looked at, and we have that strength and depth approach. I always say dice can't really send spots, so I'm grateful to us all for our engagement on this. And I have two more councillors left to ask questions, and we don't want to get locked in. I mean, I quite enjoy this, so I wouldn't mind, but the rest of you got things to do. So councillor Waring, please.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it worked quite well, because I indicated to speak because I completely disagree with the comments from councillor Jen. I think that money has to circulate. To build the economy, we need money circulating. We need people working in good, well-paid jobs that then spend money into the local economy. and having jobs on minimum wage doesn't provide an input into local, it might provide work, it might provide something for people to do, but it doesn't grow the local economy because that money's not circulating round. And if we've got industries or areas where they've got very low skilled manual tasks taking place, that's because of a historic lack of investment in the area and in their companies by the owners of those business, by the managers of those business, of lack of building up that area. They just relied on low value work. And we should be really demanding that people pay a living wage, not just a minimum wage. But if we're encouraging employers to come in, it should be on much better pay, a living wage, not just. And I wanted to actually say, I think we should be encouraging trade unionized workplaces, because if you've got trade unionized workplaces, the wages are higher. And I'm certainly the benefit of that. I've got my ASLEF diary. Train drivers, some of the highest paid manual workers in the country, and that's very much because of the work that ASLEF have done over a number of years. So I think we should be encouraging trade unionized workplaces to come in to bring better wages. And I think that's the point that I wanted to make, but is that conditions of workers' rights in workplaces are extremely important if you want to improve living standards and improve the area generally. I sit as on an employment tribunals as a judge, and I see on a regular basis how poorly treated workers are that work for some small businesses in the area. And they obviously, if they find themselves in the employment tribunal, it's because they've done something, usually that's illegal. So I think we should be strengthening workers' rights. I think we should be strengthening, encouraging trade unionisation into the area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Waring, and you sparked another conversation. Councillor Murray, please. Murray, sorry.
I think I appreciate that sort of literally left field contribution, but I want to out left field the left field contribution. We have just in Hull alone, we have 25,000 people who live by themselves. If those people got into a relationship with somebody, they shared a home, that's £9 per couple, so automatically a low wage job or a high wage job, if you're paying £1,000 rent, that takes a lot of that away. So there's 112 million just in Hull every year locked inside singledom. So we should actually perhaps be encouraging love and encouraging people to.
In line with Councillor Waring's comments, I have put down that prosperity must be for people as well as businesses. I think that was a good way to get a synopsis of the point that was trying to be driven home. And Councillor McMurray, I will be taking you to the pub later in case my girlfriend dumps me for being late home. So, Councillor Healy, you are the last councillor on my list, so no pressure, big finish, over to you, please. Yeah, follow that.
One of the most compelling reasons for setting up this mayoral combined authority, was we kept saying we're being left behind, and we saw investment going into other parts of Yorkshire. We've seen advanced manufacturing in South Yorkshire, for example, and the fact that they were 8 years ahead of us with a mayor was very much part of that, and certainly up in Tees Valley as well with Ben Houchen, we've seen him steal a bit of a march. And I remember, the candidates really sort of saying in the mayoral election, we have to have it because we've been left behind. So we're now where we are. It seems to me that we need something to hang our hats on, really. Now, obviously, in terms of the growth ready sectors, obviously you can see the work that's gone into this, and it's talking about agri-food and agri-tech, energy, manufacturing, port logistics, and so on and so forth. I almost think we've got to be a little bit sort of aspirational about what is it that we can offer. And there are so many things, like I think on the energy side of it, one of the things that I think is quite interesting was the case for hydrogen investment, for example, in Hull and East Yorkshire. Where we've got that, we're getting low carbon energy generated from hydrogen. It's like Salt End. We just have planning permission for £250 million, 100 megawatt hydrogen plant up in Aldborough where they store hydrogen. And it's almost like, what's the marketing approach? You know, where we would go out to inward investors in other parts of the world to say, what have we got to offer? And something like, well, this is a cluster for carbon capture, it's a cluster for hydrogen and for low carbon energy solutions. And certainly when I was involved with Sheffield, for example, there was a part of the council at that point, probably now the Mayoral Combined Authority, of a team of people who were going out marketing the area, right? Saying, right, this is what we offer. These are our sectors, and they would have a real growth sector. Now, it's not for me to say it should be hydrogen, but I would sort of say to the officers, can you come forward with a compelling sector that is something that we can market the area on? And as a sort of follow on for that, what plans have we got to do inward investment marketing for this region, for Hull and the East Riding? Again, it was something I've been involved in the past in Sheffield. We'd go out to places like Pittsburgh in the USA, and we'd set the stall out. You know, the only thing that they'd heard about Sheffield, by the way, in America, was the full Monty. You wouldn't believe how much that put them on the map, actually. Oh, Sheffield, yeah, that's where they had the full Monty. But do you know what I mean?
That's how we found love.
And then there were so many similarities between the steel city of Sheffield and the steel city of Pittsburgh, and those clusters were able to be focused. So I suppose my point really is, can we have something that we can set our stall on? Can the officers come up with that as an approach? Could hydrogen potentially be one? And also, what steps are we taking to actively market our area? And can we have some sort of recommendation that we would like to see active steps for proactive marketing of investment in this region?
Well, thank you, Councillor. Now, put there, present priorities and our flagship principles. An aspirational approach is needed in promotional efforts, championing our area in sectors where we can be a national and an international lead. I think that's a strong message to send to the portfolio holder and Councillor Handley.
I'd like to just put EG hydrogen
To send to the board. Yeah.
Because that's something that is really happening here.
Well, being the energy estuary.
It's a fuel of the future, potentially. So.
So, Chair, just on that hydrogen point, as far as I'm aware, somebody who I know works on rigs told me that they're waiting, one of the big companies are waiting on a government grant or something, or say so from government on that specific issue of hydrogen, because it deals with the energy storage and how you can move it. Do we have an update on that?
Well, could I suggest that none of us here are engineers, and ultimately to me, it doesn't matter whether it's hydrogen, wind turbines, any other type of energy infrastructure, or indeed if we just happen to be the best at knocking out lobsters in all of Europe. I think what the message I suggest is that here, that loud and clear, is that we would like details provided to us about government investment, whether it is, as Councillor Murray's just alluded to. What we need as a scrutiny committee is to be given the reports to make informed assessments. And the reason I say this, and it was in line with my comments to Councillor Estelle earlier, this has been quite an open-ended, quite a lackadaisical, free-flowing discussion, rather than getting down to the nitty-gritty of looking at an item, assessing it, making recommendations and making commendations. And the reason is because of the nature of what's before us. In January, I think what Councillor Healy's just said, A, B and C, specifically hydrogen, specifically government funding for it, they're the kind of things that the committee will want to see. Steve, don't ever be afraid to give us too much reading.
Chair, sorry, really quickly, if there is a time sensitive thing though from the government.
Well, there's 20 minutes to lock the building, but yeah.
Yeah, if there's a time sensitive thing with the government providing investment or not, which could essentially change it, then surely we need reassurance and scrutiny that this authority is doing as much lobbying as possible on that issue before it's too late.
Yes, exactly.
Very, very briefly, it's a really helpful description of exactly what the growth plan should do. Particularly speaking to economic strength, which is substantial, nationally significant, genuinely authentic to our region. I'm afraid I don't have the details to offer you anything on that. We need to have a conversation outside it's so I understand.
Yeah. And then the very, very last person is a wiggle from Councillor Collinson, and we then will have 20 minutes to go through the usual agenda items at the end. So Councillor Collinson, please.
Councillor Healy bringing up an American city reminded me of Hull's partner city in the States, Raleigh. And I was Lord Mayor of Hull last year, entertained the representatives from Raleigh. Raleigh have engendered great prosperity over the last few years. The city's doubled in size over the last 30 years, partly by their academic alliance between three universities in the area, a research alliance, I think they call it, research triangle, which seems to have created a substantial economic growth in that part of the world. And I see that's alluded to in this document, partnership with the universities. It's brushed through lightly, but I do think it's something that does carry great potential and is worthy of perhaps as much encouragement as we can give. The academic research, I mean, it's very regrettable in this context that the university recently shut down its chemistry department, for instance, because chemistry is quite an integral part of the local economy. I think that's an avenue that is worth encouraging and exploring and perhaps emphasising more fully in the future, suggest, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Collinson. Well, to sum up then, so one of the recommendations from Councillor Jeffries earlier was that big players are dependent upon legislation and community priorities. Resultantly, we should see both consultation results, specifically how these have fed into the delivery plans and detail on hurdles which will be brought about as a result of national actions, so that we can make recommendations to fulfil our role as the critical friend. And aiding calls for legislation as well to help in the yielding of benefits. Ultimately, it's those representations to government for the things we can't control. If they're going to make decisions, they need to be aware of how those will affect us.
For the development of businesses.
Yes, thank you,
Yeah.
Councillor Jeffries, yes. Councillor Bibb called for clarity and accessibility, particularly to engage particularly to aid engagement and local buy-in. And the example of tourism and the fishing industry being made clear as part of the agri-food and agri-tech elements of the report at question 2 that we read earlier.
Just add that I also mentioned about the energy.
I'm not there yet, Councillor Jeffries, but thank you. I'm doing it chronologically. So it was also brought up about quality jobs, but also the filling of all jobs by Councillor Collinson, and that these are two sides of the same coin. Specifically, it's all types of jobs we need to promote, enhance and fill. That also led to a bit of a discussion about sustainable and self-perpetuating growth plans, and that was very much Councillor Hale's points, particularly through the lenses that our transport, digital and energy infrastructure. It was Councillor Randall that added digital to that list. That timings, regularity, reliability, redundancy and route planning are all key when it comes to transport and can be extrapolated to energy and digital as well. That we ask that local growth plans and prosperity strategies highlight transport needs that will affect delivery. And then Councillor Estelle came in and said, talked about adding weight to SMEs with a nod towards high street prosperity, and Steve mentioned that in his answer there. But specifically for engagement and support, and keeping the pound local initiatives were mentioned, both in the discussion and also later on by Councillor Waring, keeping that money in this economy and circling around it. Every time a pound is respent, it's an extra pound, but it's not been created so much as reused. And that appropriate scaling was required as well as of the initiative, and there are horses for courses and keeping doors open as well as creating new doors were all elements of that discussion. Now, I don't quite know how Poppy's going to encapsulate that into one recommendation, but I don't see blind panic, so I have faith that she will do. So thank you there. And then we have to present priorities and flagship principles, as Councillor Healy mentioned. So an aspirational approach and promotional efforts, championing our area in sectors where there can be a national and an international lead, and to do so with specificity as well, whether that be hydrogen, fishing, tourism or anything else. Ultimately, it's this authority's job to find out what we do best and to do more of it. Councillor Healy.
Specifically, will we have officers whose job it is to sell this region? That's kind of where I'm coming to as a.
It's just a recommendation, yes, without approaching this future decisions of the board on structures, all combined with very substance.
So that could be a recommendation that we would like to see professional selling and marketing on an international stage.
We'll
Oh, please.
separate those two recommendations then. So present priorities and flagship principles to this committee in January, but also then to have a team that is out there championing our area as two separate recommendations. And I suppose from Steve's point of view, what you'll be presenting to us in January will either be this is what the team looks like, or this is why we don't have one. And if it's the second part, then please come with a reason too.
Or I'll have to save an answer until the HEYCA board have made decisions on structures, because I haven't seen those yet. I would say though, some of that work's already happening, so, you know, the combined operating the big, national conference for Leeds in May, the conversations that happen, all range about international trade missions, and, you know, when we do those things, we have to be really careful to make sure we talk about it and ensure she has an interest to, you know,
Thank you very much, Steve. And sorry for rattling through that a bit quickly at the end. We are 2 hours and 45 minutes into a 2-hour meeting. So very last point, Councillor
I haven't
Jeffries.
mentioned that battery capacity to store further grid connections is important, and also the step down transformers to store.
Well, with the comments about hydrogen that were made earlier, with the comments about Tinder that were made earlier, I wanted to really just make sure that I specifically said specificity. And so the last point I made with relation to Councillor Healy was that we champion our area and where we can be a national and international lead, and to do so with specificity. And of course, because this is on YouTube, because it's all been minuted, I would add that every point that's been raised, right from you speaking first, Councillor Jeffries, right through to the end, to all be incorporated into any future reports, documents or briefings that come before this committee, and indeed to fuel any conversations that the board do undertake. Thank you. And as I say, this has been a rather unusual meeting. This is the priest of pre-scrutinies. We have therefore been able to be a bit esoteric and, dare I say, even a bit whimsical. Normally it will be probably a lot more engineering focused, scientific in its approach. But I feel that this one was more of an artistic endeavour, in the sense that we did get to paint exactly as we'd like to and make our recommendations that I very much hope the board will either adhere to or explain to us why they've gone in a different direction, which is the very purpose of scrutiny. So thank you, members, for looking at those two substantive items substantially. Thank you, Steve. Run, and I'd say beat the traffic, but you're too late for that looking out the window. And you've got a train in 15 minutes. So run like the wind. So we've got 3 agenda items left, members. The agenda item 6 is the executive forward plan. Now that has been provided for information purposes as per the recommendation of this committee last time. I hope you all found it interesting. In the interests of time, I hope nobody found anything too worrying contained within it.
Noted.
Noted. Thank you very much, members. Agenda item 7 then would be the overview and scrutiny work programme. Now, for Councillor Collinson's benefit, we did discuss this for about an hour and a quarter. And I think you can see the stamina of this committee after today's meeting, but we did discuss that after a 5-hour training session and death by PowerPoint. So the diligence is extreme around this table. There was one amendment I wanted to make. It was suggested in the draft work programme that the Get Britain working plan be brought back to this committee as a substantive item at our March meeting. We did discuss that in September. And so we suggested that instead we have it as a briefing for the committee in April. It is included in both elements there. And so I'd suggest that if we remove it from the March meeting and have it as the team's meeting in April, then we've still got it covered. We can get our update on it as we required, but we're not doubling up on it in the space of a month, no less.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Randall. So if we're all happy with that, good to see that meeting was a sensible investment in our time. So we don't have to rush through anything now because we've done our job and done it properly already. Therefore, the last item on the agenda is the date of the next meeting. Now, Kunwari is trying to get availability for the 3rd week of December for our first briefing, which will be on the transport subject that's been mentioned a couple of times today. And we will also have our January meeting on the 21st of January for our next formal meeting of this committee. And it will be the financial and risks reports. And that will be presented by Mayor Luke Campbell and the local growth plan stage 2. So bringing this back to feed in all of the recommendations we've just made. And that will be Councillor Anne Handley and Steve Skelton reporting back to us then.
Does it have to be a Wednesday?
It doesn't necessarily have to be a Wednesday, but Cumwar will be circulating availability based on the transport officers at Hull, East Riding, Councillor Tucker as the portfolio lead, all of us. It is highly unlikely that every single person will be able to attend that briefing because there aren't enough hours in the day. But Cumwar will, I assure you, he nods sagely, do his best to enable presence from everybody possible. Councillor Collinson.
I noticed that on the agenda, the date of the next meeting is given as 21st of January 2025. I think it's 2026.
Well, as much as I would like the mayoral office to invest in a TARDIS or a DeLorean, it would probably be simpler to change that number. So thank you, Councillor Collinson.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. So is there anything further from anybody else? And the very, very, very last thing for me then is just to say the March meeting may have to be brought forward a week just due to the requirements of further, because our friends at Hull City Council have 3 elections in 4 years, just to keep things interesting.
We have elections every
Every
year
year.
now, thanks to a combined authority.
Thanks to the mayor.
There you go. So, and that will be something that we will need to discuss at our January meeting, because at that point, we will be discussing our next meeting, which will be that one. And wanted to give you a heads up. So thank you very much, members. Please all have a safe trip home, and I'll see you in a month.